Yeah, you know, we might even look in Tennessee again. You know, we've done some things in the past, and we need to follow it. Yeah. Thank you.
Regents to order. This is our last meeting of 2015, and in fact, our last meeting at this current facility. So as we are making a physical move next year. Exactly, exactly. So, yeah, that's the plan. That's right, if all goes well. Welcome this afternoon once again in this holiday season. It is a distinct pleasure to have our governor with us today, the chairman of our Board of Regents, and we will call on him momentarily for remarks, if that's okay. Sure. This is a busy time of year. The holidays are upon us, which makes it busy enough.
Oh, thank you. A reminder to everyone here, hit the button when you speak. Sorry. And Sanja provided me with a reminder, and then I forgot. It is a busy time of year, but it is especially a busy time of year here at the Board of Regents. We are in the midst of a number of our legislative events at our campuses across the state, where the Chancellor and his team and local legislators visit with our able folks out on our campuses to talk about priorities and plans. So those are important meetings. It is time for December commencements, and there are several this weekend and more to come next week. It is a time for bowl games, folks, and MTSU and Memphis are headed to bowl games this year, so congratulations. What I really want to know is how Sidney McPhee conveniently managed to get the bowl in the Bahamas, of all places. And Memphis is heading to Birmingham for a big game. It is the beginning of the second year of our Tennessee Promise program, which makes it an exciting time with mentor meetings underway and obviously the college application process underway. And in addition, we welcome to our midst, we didn't let her get very far thanks to the governor's wisdom, Mary Lou Apple to the Board of Regents, our very able former president at Motlow State. So thank you. We've already put her to work. She's been attending committee meetings and doing lots of things already, but this is your first formal meeting. So it's a pleasure to welcome you back to the fold. We have a number of media in the audience today, a number of our presidents from across the state and TCAT directors, so it's always wonderful to see all of you. Chancellor Morgan, do you have any announcements before we begin?
No, Madam Chair, other than just to thank everybody for being here and very much look forward to the agenda. And Governor, thank you for being here especially.
Madam Secretary, let's call the roll.
Governor Haslam.
Here.
Regent Apple.
Here.
Regent Deaton.
Here.
Regent Duckett.
Here.
Regent Farwell.
Here.
Regent Freeman.
Here.
Regent Griscom.
Here.
Regent Johnson. Regent Markham.
Here.
Regent McQueen. Regent Prescott.
Here.
Regent Reynolds.
Here.
Regent Roddy.
Here.
Regent Russell.
Here.
Regent Shockey.
Here.
Regent Smith. Regent Thomas.
Here.
Regent Varlin. Madam Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. We are going to accommodate the governor's schedule this afternoon, and so we may be rearranging things a little bit. But to begin our meeting, I would like to take care of one housekeeping item, and that's the approval of our minutes from our meeting of September 17 at Jackson State Community College. Thank you, Regent Freeman. A second? Thank you, Regent Duckett. Any discussion? Hearing none, this is a simple voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. all of us know that it begins with tone at the top, and our governor has set an incredible tone for us in terms of his commitment to public higher education in this great state. And you made a little news a few days ago with the focus on college and university success proposal. So we welcome you this afternoon. We're honored to have you with us, and we look forward to your comments. And would you mind taking a couple of questions?
Glad to.
That'd be great. Thank
Used
you.
to that now. Well, thank you, and let me thank all of you for serving. I think I've had a chance to visit with all of you at least sometime recently, but I really appreciate your all service on this. Obviously, Chair, or I guess Vice Chair Reynolds, referred to the Focus Act, and that's why I wanted to be sure and come today. Let me start with the reasons we did not propose this. Maybe that's the best way to put this. We did not propose this because I didn't think this board, or I thought this board was not being effective for some reason. The very last thing that I thought was that. We did not do it because there were any issue with the staff or leadership of TBR as it exists now. As a matter of fact, interestingly, as I've had conversations about this idea, both pre and post announcement, everyone, including those folks who were strongly in favor of the change, said, remarked about how well they thought this leadership team and this staff is performing now. And so nothing, the change was not prompted, at least for me, by anything that this board is or was not doing, or that the leadership in any place that I thought it had dropped a ball. On the contrary, it's actually because I think of the success that we're seeing in so many ways in Tennessee right now. As you all know, our freshman enrollment is up about 25% at our TCATs and our community colleges. And that kind of unprecedented new demand, I think, calls for a new focus on our community colleges and TCATs. I do think it can become a real opportunity for us that distinguishes us from other states, and it can be, those systems can, I think we can, with a board that's more focused on them, I think we can help take advantage of some of the distinctiveness of programs at both of those institutions. So wasn't motivated at all by current issues or failings in any way, because I think the system is strong. Was motivated by the need, I think, to focus on the growing strategic importance of community colleges and TCATs in Tennessee. I also think that there is a benefit to having our 6 current 4-year TBR schools. I say 4-year, some of those schools have graduate programs as well, obviously, but bringing a focus to them of people who, of board members who have the luxury of focusing only on those schools in a way that this board doesn't. When you come on this board, it's not your job, even though you may love MTSU or Tennessee State or Memphis or whatever school or Motlow State. It's not your job on this board to focus on that institution. And I think board members who have the luxury of focusing on that institution's success and its unique capacity to fulfill their part of the mission in the state of Tennessee, that I think whether it comes from fundraising or meeting the challenges of enrollment in an increasingly competitive world, or making certain that our schools are moving to take the next level up in terms of their standards and accomplishments, I think that having boards that are focused on individual institutions like that can provide, another boost forward for Tennessee. So that was the move. That was the reason behind the move. There are a lot of questions that we are still working out. As you might have seen a couple of days ago, we named both a transition committee and a steering committee. The transition committee is basically going to focus on all the details that our team are not able to answer. And I told folks this is a little bit like we came up with this proposal of how to do some surgery on the system, but all of us might have spent the night at Holiday Inn Express last night, but none of us actually had a medical school degree. And we needed people who were in the middle of this every day to help think through how the plumbing would work in terms of what the connection and interaction between the different institutions would be and what would change. So the transition committee has 8 members, and I think We have a majority here present. Russ is on that group. David Gregory is on that group. Tristan, where'd Tristan go, is on that group. Mary Lou is both representing the board and is a former community college president. Who am I leaving out that's here that's on that 8-person? Oh, Brian Nolan is back there and representing the four-year schools in that process. So of the 8 members, 5 of them are here. So you can be certain that the different institutions that are part of our current TBR will be well represented in that. And their task is literally to help think through anything that, all the details that, quite frankly, we aren't capable of doing because we're not in the middle of higher ed on a full-time, everyday basis. We also will have a steering committee, which will include all of the 6 current TBR universities, and then various representatives. There's 2 people from the legislature, somebody from, actually I'm chairing that group. Emily, are you on that group? John's on that group, and Joe DiPietro from UT. I don't have the complete list, but we're trying to make certain everybody whose interests might be affected by this will be represented on one of those teams. So with that, I will stop, and I'd be glad to try my very best to answer questions that you might have.
I know it won't surprise you that I've got one, Governor. So, while the Drive to 55, when you announced it, you made that connection, really focuses, and from my take, more on numbers, meaning completions and number of people coming through. Your proposal, though, looks, from my perspective, more trying to focus on not just the completion, but making sure that we're focused on the kind of training so that the students coming out are really ready for this workforce in the future. Is that a fair approach to how you look at it?
I mean, we've put a big focus on the quantity, the Drive to 55 in terms of number of degrees produced. And so when we met with Chancellor Morgan and David Gregory as early as just recently as this morning to talk about their capital plans, and they are rightly focused on investing dollars where we can produce degrees, which is their task. But I think we also want to be focused on quality and on the producing the right degrees in terms of what both the market is saying, and in terms of what Tristan's kind of work has been in terms of the qualifications for each of those students and what we think might lead them to success. So I think that's a fair summary, and I think, again, being able to, I hate to keep using the word, being able to focus more on each of those institutions, I think will allow us to do that.
Thank you. Let me applaud you, Governor, first and foremost, for taking the initiative to think outside the box when it comes to higher education here in Tennessee. I guess I'll make a comment first, and that is, as we move through with these changes, we don't lose sight of the ultimate customers that we have in those, and that being our students. Any changes that we make must focus on what's in the best interest of the students. If we proceed as indicated with the 6 4-year degree plus granting universities, my question is, what incentives will we have in place to ensure that those independent institutions have a degree of collaboration between them?
Great question, and that'll be one of the things that both the transition and the steering committee will focus on. But ultimately, I think it's one of the beauties of the Complete College Act. It's in everybody's benefit to have that kind of cooperation. The example I would give now is Pellissippi and the University of Tennessee, while part of 2 different systems, right now, quite frankly, have a great working relationship. And you've seen their attendance increase and their transfers their transfers increase as well. So I think it can work without everybody being part of the system. And again, I think it's one of the beauties of the Complete College Act. The other thing I'll say is this. The 4-year presidents, I know several of them are here right now, they're under increased pressure to attract more students in a very competitive world and then to graduate those students. And the Tennessee Promise has been both a benefit and a challenge. We've opened the funnel wider in terms of people who are going to school after post-secondary, but it's hard to compete, obviously, with free if you're one of our existing 4-year schools. And so that's made them, I can look at almost to a person of these presidents and tell you they're out recruiting places that they haven't in the past. And that's part of the world we live in, when I see Brian back there, he's going over the mountain to North Carolina and Virginia trying to find students. And I shouldn't start calling out people because every one of them is competing for students in a new way than they've had to before. I think that it'll be in everybody's interest to keep that sort of connection going, because if I'm a four-year president, I'm going to be working really hard with my community college to make certain that my presence on that campus is really strong.
Other questions, comments? Dr. Farwell?
Is there a mechanism with the transition team and the steering team so that faculty and students can have input and direct input?
Sure. So those will be open meetings, and they can definitely do that. The reason we didn't do that was for this reason. The focus is going to be a lot more on if this was a building, on the HVAC connections and the electricity and the plumbing between the, I'm not talking literally with a building, but between the systems. And because we felt like the focus needed to be on those connection type issues, that's how we name those committees. This proposal won't, I think, impact our current academic processes at each of those schools. Ultimately, it might is a renewed focus on each of the institutions, but right now it's my intention that if you're a faculty member or a staff member at any of the institutions, that nothing in your life will change as a result of this decision. But there will be ample opportunity for input there. Others, Wait, you get two before other people?
Sorry. I want to since we do have the community colleges
Right.
and the TCAP,
Right.
I'd like to ask you to give us your thoughts, comments, reaction to the first year Tennessee Promise, because we're getting ready to look at it again. And are there things that you've seen that were sort of learning lessons that, as we look at the next next class coming up, that are helpful for us as regents to understand a little more about the promise and what we ought to be expecting, or some of the things that we need to at least make sure we're addressing?
Yeah, I think some of the things that happened that we did a nice job of would be the mentor program has worked out really well. Our community colleges have made a real effort to realize this is a whole new cohort of students coming in, with a lot of students who are first generation college students. And in my opinion, I haven't been to every school, but I've been impressed with the preparation that's been made by the community colleges to how do we make certain these students are onboarded when they may or may not have the environment at home that's supportive of their efforts. I think some of the lessons we will still learn. We're waiting to see, obviously, our semester-to-semester fall off, and then our first year, our freshman retention rate going into to the second year. So I'm a little hesitant to make any broad sweeping conclusions, although my main one would be I think the system has adjusted well to the new population. I think the reality is the presidents are having to live in a changing world. Our community college, because the economy's gotten better, some of our older students aren't choosing community colleges the way they did before because the job market is strong for them out there right now. And so we've seen our overall attendance, be flat or close to flat, while our freshman attendance is way up. Well, that's changed the environment of the campuses as well. So what my hope is that we sit down this summer when we can see, here's what happened semester to semester, here's what we're seeing in terms of freshman retention, and see how do we continue to adjust our mission at each one of those schools. I'll believe that one. Anybody else? I don't want to hog the meeting, but I realize this is a pretty big change we're proposing. But I think it's an opportunity for us in Tennessee to take the next step, and I'm incredibly pleased with the work that's happening, and like I said, I think we have a big opportunity in front of us.
Thank you. Oh, well done. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your time with us. And as you said, it is a strong system. And as one of my fellow regents said to me the other day, as we were talking about the proposal, there is plenty of work to go around. So, and we will all keep our shoulder to the grindstone, as the old expression goes. We are fortunate in Tennessee to be the subject of a lot of national attention on this issue, and we look forward to working with you on the plumbing and the wiring as we move forward. And our TCAT folks know a lot about plumbing and wiring, that's for sure. Because students, as Regent Duckett put it, are our customers, and ultimately what we are all about is their success. I think it might be a great time to turn to the Chancellor's report and get our latest completion delivery update to give you a little texture about the progress that we continue to make.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. And as the board members are used to this, I typically give my report by recognizing somebody to come give my report. So I won't break tradition. And Tristan, if you'll make your way up to the podium, and as you do, I will just mention one thing. We are in the middle, as the staff here at the system office, in the middle of our briefing cycle with institutions. We're having roughly 2.5 hours, I guess, ability to sit down with the senior staff from each institution and kind of talk about where we are, what's happening here, what's happening at the institutions. And I can report to you that all across our system there are tremendous things going on in terms of student success. I think people are doing exactly what we want them to do, what we have asked them to do to really promote the state's needs and the state's agenda. So for those of you that we've already met with, I know you're glad that we're already through with it. For the others, we look forward to doing that over the course of the next few days. But Tristan, if you would, make my report.
I'll be happy to. Thank you. Governor, Vice Chair Reynolds, Chancellor, members of the board. It's what I want to talk about is really an overview and a quick overview of the kind of student success initiatives that we have going on across the campuses. And what I want to do is to talk about that from a system-wide scale. Clearly, there are an enormous number of institutional-based student success initiatives, but these are the ones, what I want to talk about today are the ones which really have a system-wide flavor. And really, they're all based on, as we've talked about, the drive to 55. What we know in our system is that to meet the goals of drive to 55, we need to graduate 43,202 undergraduate degrees by 2025. And so everything in our system is focused on how it is that we're going to bring that about. And clearly, it's already been the case that we put a lot of things in place around student success. And that's really borne out by the fact that even though, at least in the short term past, our overall enrollment has been declining. I've talked to this board a number of times about the fact that that's been our trend. That trend has now turned, but even over those past 4 or 5 years, we've seen a steady increase in the number of awards that the system has given. And much of that is a testimony to the fact that student success initiatives, they work. When they're appropriately applied, they work, and they change the lives of individual students every day. So what I'll do is to talk about at least some of the big things that we've put in place over this semester and over the last year, and why it is that we believe that those things are important things to do. The first is about helping students to make a decision when they arrive on campus. This year we made the bold move of now requiring every student in the Tennessee Board of Regents, when they appear on campus, to choose either an academic program or an academic focus area. We did this because when we did the data analysis, we realized that more than half of the students who arrived undecided and chose to choose later, more than half of them left before they chose anything at all. And so what we know is that making that choice, getting that direction, that's an enormous piece about making a successful plan and making a successful pathway to graduation. So that's what we did. We required all of the students to make that choice. And of course, just making the choice isn't enough. What we needed to do was to put in place on every campus robust kinds of advising initiatives that would allow those students to make informed choices about their future and how those informed choices lead to successful careers in their future too. And that's all in place, and so it's now the case that, well, it's reasonable to say, well, how did that turn out? We surveyed the students. The wonderful news is that as we surveyed the students, less than 1% of the students said, well, yeah, I chose because you made me. There's all kinds of reasons to choose, right? You choose because your parents told you choose because you know somebody, you choose because your interests lie in that direction, you choose because there's a successful, well-paying job in that direction. And a lot of people who said, my interests lie in the direction, their interests for a well-paying job, that's fine. But requiring something in such a way that, in the end, overwhelmingly people chose because that's where they saw success, not just because I made them check a box, that's an enormous step forward and a real success for us. Getting them on a path is now the next piece. And that's been also a huge theme for us. That now we know that students have an overall direction, a pathway that they want to go. What we need to do is to lay out to them a clear graduation path. And so there's been tremendous work on campuses about creating those clear 2 or 4 year paths to graduation, knowing precisely which courses to take, when to take them, and then coordinating how they can be taken. So that's a big piece from students. What it's also done is allowed us to have a system-wide coordination of that, because clearly each of those individual pathways for each individual student, they are subtly and nuancedly different. But by having a system-wide perspective about how we can coordinate that, what we've been able to do is to align those pathways in such a way that, first of all, as students are going through a particular focus or a particular program, that they can nuance and specialize their program as they go, going from perhaps a more general kind of curriculum to a particular concentration, maybe going from chemistry to forensic chemistry or biochemistry. But more than that, to also coordinate that alignment so as students perhaps change their mind from one program to a neighboring program, that they can do that in such a way that they lose as little academic credit as possible. Sometimes, of course, it's the case that if you move from one program to another program, then you have courses that no longer meet curricular needs. But by doing some overarching discrete optimization, and working with disciplined faculty to arrange those paths with an overarching perspective, we've been able to do that in such a way that as students make those changes, they do it in such a way that they will lose as little academic credit as possible. And that's a big step forward. Part of that is alignment in mathematics. You know that I'm a mathematician by trade, and so not just talking about mathematics because I happen to be a mathematician, but it turns out to be the case that mathematics is an extraordinary key to making sure that students succeed. Mathematics at the freshman level has long been the graveyard of dreams. Students go in, they take a math class, and those who aren't successful, their dreams basically end there. Those that are successful, they are able to move on. What we want to do is to ensure, and this is what we've been able to do, working with disciplined faculty to ensure that the math class that students are required to take as part of their curriculum, that it's the math class that pertains to the curriculum that they're studying, that there's a curricular relevance to what it is that they're studying, and not just taking college algebra because college happens to be in the name. And so this has been, again, a very rich and robust conversation across our system to align that across all of the programs 2 and 4 year. Co-requisite remediation. Co-requisite instruction has been a very large piece of what we put in to guarantee that kind of success. I think many of you know that over the last 50 years, remedial education has been a struggle across our nation. What we've been here in Tennessee is pioneers of understanding how it is that we can do that progressively better. This year, based on this kind of pilot data that we did that showed that by changing the way that we do remediation in mathematics and in reading and in writing, that we can dramatically increase the success rates for students, multiplying success rates 6-fold. So this year we have implemented that at full scale. What we already see is that the students who went through that pilot last year, there were about 1,000 students who went through the math pilot, about 1,000 students who went through the reading pilot and the reading and writing pilot. Those students have returned this fall at a starkly greater rate. You can see a 22-point increase in fall-to-fall retention. So it's not just about math, it's not just about writing, it's about that overall success. And to see retention rates changing by double digits is something which you just simply don't see in higher education. It's a 45% increase in fall-to-fall retention. And you can see it's not just about retention, they're also earning lots more credits over their first year, and we know that that's also a very key part of their success. Part of that is not only in co-requisite classes, not only in those initial math, reading, and writing classes, but across the gateway classes. And so we've worked with all of the schools to scale that up. We have roughly 30,000 students now in math classes that they would not otherwise have been in roughly 15,000 in writing classes and 15,000 in reading classes. This year, in a few weeks' time, we'll be able to see exactly the success, whether it really does scale in the way that we anticipate. Clearly, math, reading, and writing is not everything. There's plenty of gateway classes in which we know that we need our students to be successful. Over the last 2 years, we partnered with discipline teams from campuses to try to reinvigorate those gateway classes. We did 57 last year, 57 projects. What was extraordinarily encouraging was 37 of those 57 produced substantially better results. And so now those projects have been scaled up across not only those pilot sections, but across all the sections in that discipline at that school. We're working with another 44 schools, 44 teams right now. So we'll works with, well, I guess now is the end of the semester. So we have worked with over 100 teams to change the initial pedagogy in those gateway classes. We know that too will have a huge impact on student success. We're rethinking online. We've clearly had the RODP program for more than 15 years, but now we have repositioned that online program and rebranded it as TN eCampus. TN eCampus has a library of more than 450 shared online courses, which are seamlessly available to all of our undergraduates. But now it's also the case that students who want to study in a program in the Tennessee Board of Regents can find more than 500 fully or substantially online degree programs across our 2- and 4-year schools, and this portal will lead them exactly into those programs. So again, this is an enormous wealth, which has been very difficult to be able to navigate in the past. You sort of had to know where the program was to go and find it. This portal will allow people to really realize that. And we intend to position this portal as really a statewide digital asset for finding online resources. Last thing I want to talk about is using predictive analytics. Because as we take students along those pathways, it's extraordinarily important that schools are able to know who are the students who are floundering, who are the students where we need to intervene, and what can we say when we do. So over the last years, we've been developing here at the board level a probabilistic model for us to be able to know exactly what it is that's going on with students. This is about 2,000 students in our system. The green students actually ended up graduating. The red students did not. And what you can see is this rain. And the students who are raining down to the bottom, those are students who are earning grades in classes that are basically eliminating their likelihood of ever graduating in that program. What's crucial is it's that program. And so what we now know by using this analytics technique is that those students, despite the fact that they have very little likelihood of graduating that program, that there are other programs in which they can still be very successful. You can see there that student crawling along the bottom there, but at the top of that yellow column is another program, or if they were in that program, they would have a much better likelihood of graduating from that. And you can see that's a relatively common phenomenon. What we've done is taken this theoretical work and changed it into an interface. We're the first system in the nation to be able to provide this to every school, 2- and 4-year, to provide an interface to allow, first of all, the school to know precisely the students who need intervention, and then also to provide that information to each advisor, so as they sit down with, if they sit down with that individual student, look at that. If they sit down with that individual student, then they can have a glimpsing view of that interface that they would like to see. It shows them not only the fact that they need to change program, but other programs that have a similar kind of career focus, other programs in which if they change to that other program, they would be more successful. What we done just a month ago, we convened leadership teams from every school to their craft and implementation plan so that they would be able to use this data to actually implement it on their campus. And that's been our pattern, to enable this work by helping schools to create an intentional plan to put these things in place. Clearly, this kind of work is the kind of work which is happening nationwide, but our system really is being recognized as a national leader in this. Just a few weeks ago, there was a joint statement that came out from Complete College America, Jobs for the Future, the Dana Center, and several other national groups that was actually modeled after the work that we're doing and urging other states to do exactly the same kinds of things and put those things in place. It's also the case the National Association of System Heads. They too are working on collective impact work, and we are one of 3 lead systems in helping other systems to be able to do that work. And lastly, this work has been rewarded by the Gates Foundation. We recently were awarded a $2 million grant by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to support this work, taking it deeper, and also continuing to implement things that have a similar kind of focus. So hopefully that gives you a flavor of how it is that as a system we are coordinating student success, and I'd be very happy to answer any questions you might have. Sir. So actually, and it's actually very crucial. It's a great question. It's a deliberate piece of the predictive analytics design that it only uses academic data. It does not use demographic data in any way. And this has been I think you know that I've been working on this for a little while, and it's an important design feature. And what we've seen actually as we've studied these predictive analytics models, what they do is they empower decision making. And there is part of the achievement gap for low-income and minority students is actually an information gap. That students who are first-generation students, they often are not in a position to know they don't know the questions even to ask, let alone how to ask them or who to ask them of. And so by being able to level that information gap, you empower people to make much more informed and advantageous decisions for themselves. So what we've seen actually is where those things are in place, that actually we see achievement gaps close, and that's exactly what we expect to see here too. Yeah, it's exciting. Thank you. Yeah.
So may I ask a question on this
15
particular,
minutes.
particularly on the predictive analytics and what we're doing at the system? I mean, just to talk about what we've been talking about, are all of the institutions, would they have that capability without this coming from the system office? I know it's those analytics, they're expensive and
Right, and that's the reason why we've gone about developing this as a system. That it is the case that we have some schools that have gone out and purchased that capability from vendors, and there are several vendors that are beginning to fill that void, but those resources come at a very high price, and so by being able to instead create that resource here centrally and be able to provide that information and that interface to all of our schools at no cost, other than my and people in my office's time, then this clearly is a significant advantage. And actually it is the case that this is a very quickly evolving world right now. This idea of using predictive analytics, it's only a discipline which is maybe 4 or 5 years old, and so even the work that the vendors are doing, it's quickly evolving. Well, what's nice is that by us being able to work with it here, it's people who know the plumbing and wiring who are developing it, and so we understand not only the questions to ask, but the issues, the fine scale issues that lie behind them, and it's also the case that we can change things very quickly. We don't have to use a business model to say, well, you may need that, but nobody else needs that. Why do we need to develop that? We can develop the tools exactly that our schools need in precisely the form they need them.
so we're providing the data and the information, and the institutions are developing how they're going to use that data to improve their own completion or their own strategies or interventions.
Yes, ma'am. That's exactly the focus of the Completion Academy. That was really a 2-day event where each of those teams went through actually a facilitated conversation to exactly make intentional implementation plans about, number one, how can you help. So there are courses which are critical to a student's success in each particular discipline. How can we communicate that information to each student and also to the advisors as part of the advising process? How can we, now that we know, the quote is, there's an Albert Einstein quote, that to those who have the privilege to know comes the responsibility to act. So if we know, then now what are we going to do about it? So how will we intervene now that we know that this student here, that they need our assistance? And lastly, how can we take the information about the fact that there are other decisions that they might make and help allow them the space to be able to make that more advantageous decision? Each school has made that definitive implementation plan.
Well, that's excellent, and really congratulate the system and the office for working on that so that it can be shared. I think that's excellent, and it is cutting edge. Excellent.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Tristan, I was just going to ask you, as a part of our strategy, will we continue to collaborate with K through 12 and those first time to go to higher education institutions in their family? If we begin early, we can avoid a lot of remedial as they move to Tennessee Promise, at our community colleges, to better prepare the K through 12 low income, first time to college students for that level of higher education.
Well, you're exactly right. And actually, I guess it was yesterday that actually I was down at the Department of Education sitting and taking the TN Ready test to see, to firsthand understand whether or not it really does.
How did it turn
it's
out?
just, it's FERPA, right? I can't tell
FERPA,
you.
that's right.
But clearly, we are just as committed to make sure that we have high expectations for our K-12 standards, and that we know that by having a robust curriculum that prepares students through that curriculum, that they will be much better prepared when they come to us. I would love it to be the case that the co-requisite idea, that it's an anachronism, right? 5 years from now, we just don't need it anymore. That would be fabulous from my perspective. But we need it right now. And the reality is that we will need it for quite some time for returning adults who want to come back to higher education. But for K-12, maybe it goes away in some years, and that would be fabulous. We also have the sales program, which is part of the K-12 partnership right now, and that too has been paying extraordinary dividends in making sure that students are able to work with that remediation as part of their high school experience. And then lastly, we've been actually partnering with the state board and the department in actually changing the math curriculum in senior level mathematics so that it recognizes this new math alignment that we have. The fact that now it's the case that not every student needs to take college algebra shapes the fact that not everybody needs to necessarily take advanced algebra as part of their senior experience in high school. Instead, maybe a statistics course would be a much better fit for them to then go on and do collegiate level statistics. And a substantial number of our programs, statistics is the right thing, not college algebra.
I guess the other part of that is assuring that our school systems have the resources, the technology, and I applaud Regent Freeman again for coming to Chattanooga and assisting Brainerd High School, providing 2 computers in each class to ensure the students had, and the instructors, the teachers, had the resources, the technology, in order to prepare our students for the future.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I would love to see the education department in each of our systems develop a plan to find a system that they could model after and set a goal, in 5 years, 3 years, to reach that quality and to have our students prepared for the future.
Yeah, it's my understanding that K-12 is kind of moving very much in that direction.
Oh, well, I'm glad to hear
absolutely.
that. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and Regent Roddy, one quick point on that. Tennessee, along with the TBR system, along with the State University system in New York, really were the two leading systems, higher education enterprises, public higher education enterprises across the country that were integral in establishing an organization or movement really called Higher Ed for Higher Standards. I'm very proud that every one of our institutional leaders in Tennessee have joined that effort. There's some, I think we're up to about 425, I believe is the last number I saw, institutions and systems across the country that have embraced the idea of higher standards for our high school students, rigorous standards that in fact will prepare them to be ready for college. You know, part of the, that's a political issue in a lot of states. What used to be known as Common Core, we don't call it that anymore. We call them, rigorous standards, high school, Tennessee high school standards. But what we know is that our high schools in Tennessee have been performing at the standards that have been set for them.
Yes.
I mean, it wasn't like they were giving diplomas to students. They were doing what the state had said, here are the expectations for a high school graduate in terms of what they know and what they can do. It turned out that wasn't good enough. It wasn't what they needed to know and needed to be able to do in order to be successful at our institutions and other higher institutions in the state. So we're very much behind the idea that if we set the standards correctly, if we really expect high school students to perform at a level that suggests that they are in fact college ready or career ready, ready to be trained for a career, then our students and our teachers in K-12 systems across the state can rise to that challenge. It's just we have expected too little, and we have gotten what we expected. So if we expect more, we'll get more, and as Tristan says, we hope that within a generation, the need to remediate students coming straight out of high school will be essentially gone.
Yeah.
For adults, if I was going back, I'd probably need a little help in math. But so there'll always be some need for learning support for our on our campuses to help get students to where they need to be in order to be successful. But standards, real assessments, really are the key to making that, to solving that problem in Tennessee. Anything else for my report? Once again, it was an extraordinarily successful chancellor's report, so thank you all very much.
And I think a real credit to you and a greater credit to Tristan that the governor wanted to stay to hear the completion delivery update.
I think Tristan gets that credit.
So, no, well done. And congratulations on the Gates Award as well. That's very impressive. Makes us all proud. So well done. The governor did have to resume his schedule, but again, our thanks to him for not only his leadership, obviously, on public higher education in this great state, but for taking the time to be with us for a few minutes. And again, as I said, we look forward to working with him going forward. At this time, I'm going to turn back to our regular order of business, and Chancellor, call on you once again for the report of interim action.
Thank you, Madam Chair. But you have, I think it was circulated to you some days ago, the interim action report for the fourth quarter. This represents the business that has been conducted by the system office on your behalf for that period of time. There is, I think it is fair to say all of the matters addressed in the interim action report are routine kinds of things that you have seen in previous reports, and I would recommend approval of that report.
Any questions for, thank you, Regent Thomas. A second?
Second.
Thank you, Regent Prescott. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. The interim report is approved. Our next order of business are two committee reports. You had in your package the audit committee minutes from November 18, and then our ad hoc committee on committee minutes. Once again, if we need a motion to accept those as presented. Thank you, Regent Griscom. A second from Regent Varlin. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much. Those are approved. Always one of my favorite parts on the program, the Regents Award in Excellence in Philanthropy, and we call on Regent Markham.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I share your enthusiasm. It's my pleasure to recognize the honorees of the Regents Award for Excellence in Philanthropy. 4 recipients are selected annually for this award, and this is the first time a recipient from Volunteer State Community Colleges has been selected. The honorees are well known to Volunteer State community. They're active community members and leaders, giving of their time and money to multiple organizations and are true philanthropists at heart. I'm speaking of the Honorable Diane Black and Dr. David Black. This award was presented to the Blacks in ceremonies conducted last May at the club at Foxland Harbor in Gallatin, Tennessee. In 1990, Dr. David Black founded Aegis Sciences Corporation, where he serves as founder, chairman, and CEO. Aegis is a forensic healthcare chemical and drug testing laboratory specializing in zero-tolerance drug testing and many other drug, crime, and health evaluations. Dr. Black serves as program administrator for substance abuse programs for NASCAR, IndyCar, and World Wrestling Entertainment. He serves as a consultant to Major League Baseball Players Association and the National Football League Players Association. Dr. Black is also the chairman for Aegis Foundation, providing gifts of time, talent, and money to programs on youth education, character, and veterans. The Honorable Diane Black is a former adjunct professor at Volunteer State Community College and has also served on the Board of Trustee at the college's foundation since 1999. Congressman Black has served on many area local boards and was a state representative and state senator prior to being elected to the United States Congress in 2010. She serves on the House Ways and Means Committee and the House Budget Committee. She is co-author of the 2014 Path to Prosperity budget. Congressman Black stays true to her values in representation to her districts. The Blacks are magnanimous givers in the community and beyond. They serve actively in their church, local Rotary Club, and Rotary International, where they have both served on medical, dental, and vision mission trips to Guatemala. Congressman Black and Dr. Black are true philanthropists at heart and love Volunteer State Community College. Dr. Black has provided internships at his business for students from Vol State. The Blacks were the first to step up to the plate in Volunteer State's Foundation Capital Campaign for a humanities building with a $1 million pledge. Prior to this pledge, the Blacks had already been inducted into the Hal Raymer Society at the partner level for their gift giving. Without them, the humanities building might not have come to fruition. As ambassadors for Volunteer State Community College and the Foundation, the Blacks represent everything that the Regents Award in Excellence and Philanthropy was established to recognize. It's my great honor to recognize the Honorable Diane Black and Dr. David Black with the Regents Award for Excellence in Philanthropy. The Blacks could not be with us here today, and at this time I would like to ask Volunteer State Community College President Jerry Faulkner to step forward with additional comments. Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you, Regent Markham. Vice Chair Reynolds and members of the board, it's my great pleasure to be able to speak about the Blacks on the occasion of them being the first recipient of the Philanthropy Award as donors to Volunteer State Community College. Regent Markham, you have well summarized the great affection and the great support of the Blacks for Volunteer State Community College and for the community. They give to so many things in the community and are great supporters of Vol State. The board will no doubt remember that in June, at the June board meeting, we brought forward a proposal for the naming of that new humanities building. And as the lead donors, we consulted with the Blacks about what the name of the building should be. And they certainly would have been well within their rights to ask that it just be simply called the David and Diane Black Humanities Building. But instead, their request was that it be called the Steinhauer Rogan Black Humanities Building. They chose to honor two other families that have been servants in the community, and although they were not large donors to the building project, they wanted to use that opportunity to honor these other two families. And that's characteristic of the blacks. They're always ready to use their time and their talents and their resources to support the community and to honor others in the community that serve. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, President Faulkner. Vice Chairman Reynolds, that completes my report.
Thank you, well done. So, and I share the applause for Congressman and Dr. Black. They are extraordinary people, and it was a great night to be there and to be with our very capable team at Vol State. So thank you. Thank you, Chairman Markham. We are moving on this afternoon to an important topic in our report from our presidents and directors. A few months ago, the board will recall during our committee meetings, we had a Chief Peaster from MTSU come speak to us, the police chief, about safety and security. And unfortunately, as events continue to unfold at college campuses across the country, the Chancellor and I discussed the need and in fact the opportunity for us to hear at a board meeting in greater detail about campus safety and security. And David Gregory has done an excellent job this afternoon in putting this report from our presidents and directors together for us. And I will turn this over to Vice Chancellor Gregory to begin this important discussion.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you also just for your foresight in agreeing that this is an important topic to have discussed at this level. 70 days ago at Umpqua Community College in Roseburg, Oregon, a 26-year-old student stepped into an English classroom, fired a warning shot, and began killing his fellow students until he ultimately killed himself. He killed a professor, and he killed 8 other students. He wounded 9 others. That's a sobering thought, and it creates a number of challenges as we think about going forward. We were scheduled to appear before the Senate Education Committee on a number of different topics. Tristan was about to give the presentation that you've just seen here this morning to the Senate Education Committee when the chairlady called and said, can we defer that and hear a presentation on campus safety and security? So for the next few minutes, members of the Regent staff, you're going to hear a few presentations. First of all, from the respective chairs of the President's Council, Dr. Elisa White, Dr. Karen Boyer, and Director Dwight Murphy. They'll speak specifically about the sort of the size, relative size of the staff that are on our various campuses, and anything that they may want to say that's unique to either the university sector, the community college sector, and the TCAT sector. After that, I will be back and try to help moderate a panel of 2 of our police chiefs from across the system, which I'll introduce to you at a later point, as well as Dwight Murphy. So with no further ado, Madam Chairman, I'll turn the podium over to Dr. Elisa White from Austin Peay State University.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor, and thank you, Vice Chair Reynolds, and members of the Board of Regents, and Chancellor Morian. Someone asked me a couple of months ago what keeps me up at night, and I answered nothing, really. I'd have the kind of personality that I worry when I'm awake and then I'm done till the next day. And part of that comes from being a member of a university with much intellectual capital. We have the brightest minds in the country on our campuses, and I believe that together we can solve just about any challenge or problem that comes. But when I reflected on that question later, I had to think about my responsibility as a president, really trying to ensure the safety of all of our campus community members. And then I had to really realize that what keeps me up at night is when I get if I get a call at 1:30 in the morning and I get them, just like my colleagues do, those are terrible because you know it's not going to be good. And sometimes it's an accident on the intramural field, sometimes it's a car accident. and I don't have any control over those. But thinking about what I'm going to say to that parent, how I'm going to respond to that family, how I'm going to, and it's not me, it's my team, but how we're going to be responsive to those entrusted in our care is sobering. But what allows me to think that everything's okay and what helps me sleep at night is knowing the experience, the expertise, and the wisdom our campus safety officers bring to the table. Our campuses are served and trained. They're served by trained and certified peace officers. They have expertise that we don't have. They work in a very unique environment. So not only do they serve to protect our campus communities, we're talking faculty, staff, and students and visitors, but they also deal with residents on the campuses who've just left home for the first time. And their moms and dads aren't in control of what they're doing, and they're trying to keep those folks in line and put a hand on the back and try to encourage them to get through without just slamming the book the first time. And that's a fine line. And they're also the ones who are the first responders in an accident. They're the ones who will be the first responders if there's a shooting. They're the ones who really are trained to serve and protect us, and they're balancing typical policing responsibilities with those that are really unique to college campuses. So I'm very proud of the work that they do for all our campuses. So the certified police complete basic training, police training, that's 400 hours, plus they take 40 hours of in-service training each year, and that includes firearm training. And so you have before you a staffing chart that just shows the number of security officers that each of us have. And I did break down actually the numbers by our total enrollment divided by our peace officers, but it doesn't work because our needs vary according to how many students live on campus and the number of students that we have who are online and don't come to campus. So that's really not a number that you have to look at. So beginning with Austin P, and these are just in alphabetical order, not because Austin P is the most important, even though that's probably true. I have 1 year at this, and they're going to get me next year. But, at Austin P, we have 22 total police officers, and some of those are certified. Those are the 18, and then we have 4 who are non-armed security officers. At the same time, we, like most institutions, beef up that security when we have special events. So we contract with security companies. East Tennessee State has 23. 20 of those are certified. Middle Tennessee has 37, 35 of which are certified. Tech has 21, 14 of which are certified. Tennessee State has 51, 23 of which are certified, and University of Memphis has 60, 38 of which are certified, and those cover 2 campuses. And so I'll let my colleague, Dr. Boyer, share results from her sector as well.
Go ahead.
I have a question before you leave. Can we go back a slide? On the number of security officers that are contracted, are they capable of carrying firearms, or are they, quote, just security officers?
It is my understanding that those that are contracted from police, like city police, sheriff's departments, those have firearms. Those that are contracted from security companies are most likely not. Is that a fair assessment? Yeah.
Can I follow up
Regent
that too?
Gibson.
So with the number who are not what I call employees or employed officers, do you all have enough time to make sure they understand the practices and procedures you all have in place on your campus to deal with issues of safety?
I feel pretty confident that's the case because, one, even though I'm not a police officer, I meet with our police chief every month. In fact, I meet with our the director of counseling. I meet with our EEO officer, our attorney, our dean of students, and our police chief. And we do a thermometer meeting to see what's happening on campus. Is there a trend? Are you seeing more issues in the dorms? Are you seeing more issues with mental health? And so we talk a lot about things that could create a challenging environment. What I've learned in those meetings that our police chief is in regular communication with the city of Clarksville. he is regularly talking to them not only about cases on campus, but our neighborhood, because we're downtown. He also has a close relationship with the sheriff's department. And so the people that they hire, at least that I'm aware of, and I may not be aware of all of it, but I don't think these are people they get from an agency that are just likely to come on campus for a short time. But we know these people, and they're regulars. And so if I go to an event, I'm likely to see the same people over and over who are on our campus a lot, even if they're contracted out. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Sorry about that.
If I could, Regent Griscom, just add for a moment on the contract security people. It's our under TBR policy and state law, only post-certified officers can go armed on our campuses. So those part-time people that are hired who are hired through the local law enforcement agency can carry. But if they hire contract security guards who are just licensed security guards, not post-certified law enforcement agencies, those people cannot carry weapons on our campus.
Okay. Madam Chair, members of the board, Chancellor, good to be here to talk about security, and we too have a survey of our institutions, and you can see the different numbers that are there for post-certified, and as Dr. White explained, they're very skilled and trained people with 400 hours before they become certified, and then 40 hours every year, and they do go through medical and psychological exams, and their fingerprints are on file in the TBI. So. But not all of us in the community colleges use post-certified police. I know at Dyersburg State we do not. Dyersburg at least is a town of about 16,000. We're right in the middle of town, and we did have an active shooter on campus in 2003, and our local police were there in 2 minutes. If our armed guard would have been over in the gym and having to get to the building where the shooter was, probably would have taken him 5 minutes to get across campus. So and the same is true in Trenton, another very small town, and Covington. We have, and a lot of the local police are our graduates. We have a criminal justice program, and that's true across our community colleges. So they know our campuses, they know our situations, and they're very attentive to any problems that we might have. So you can see along, we have 7 institutions that are that have post-certified, and this is POST is Peace Officers Standards and Training Commission. It's a state commission, and we have 6 community colleges that do not have. So it's almost an even split there. But I think all of us hire local police officers for special events, particularly basketball games and any other special events that we have on our campuses. And the numbers vary quite a bit. And you can tell from whether we're urban or suburban or rural, the number of centers we may have. Many of us have at least 3 or more off-campus centers or satellite locations. Then, of course, the size of the institution also makes a big difference. I think of all of our institutions, only 1 reported a weapons law violation in the year 2014. That was a knife event. It was not a shooter. And then just looking through, when we collected all the emergency training that's going on across our colleges, I think you'd be very impressed with all that we're doing to try to be ready for any kind of an emergency that might occur. We have active shooter drills. As we know, there's lockdowns. It's a response in that kind of drill, and sometimes it's run, hide, and fight principles that are used in the case of an active shooter. In the colleges, most of us use building coordinators that are trained faculty or staff that direct building occupants in the case of an emergency. So there's someone, and also I think all of our custodians are very alert to these things. They all have radios. I know in our case, all of our radios are tied in with police radios for the cities that we're in. So everybody is hearing everyone else whenever there's a problem. And a lot of our other drills that we have, of course, for safety with fire, tornado, bomb threat, chemical spill, hazmat kinds of things. And I think all of us have emergency mass notification systems. Some of the popular ones are Rave and Alert Us. And many of us have phones in each classroom that can serve as communication devices. And with these mass notification systems, faculty, staff, students get emails, text messages, phone calls. There's multiple ways that they're alerted to a problem. And it also tells them what they should do, whether it's going to be a shelter in place or whether they need to evacuate or whether they need to go to a designated area. Many of us have the emergency on-site notification, so it's used to notify security officers if someone dials 911 from one of our phones. The security officer receives information about the building, room, and an extension number of where that phone call came from. And we participate in other drills such as the Great American Shakeout, which is trying to build awareness of steps to take in case of an earthquake. So there's lots of things to stay up at night worrying about, I guess, if you want to. But hopefully we're trying to be ready for an awful lot of situations. And our students in our criminal justice programs do get involved in this training that we have for our campuses, so it's really good experience for them. And I think all of us have camera surveillance systems that help us too in any kind of situation. I know at our college, after this 2003 event, we have a policy that classroom doors are locked during the time of the class time. So that's caused students to be less tardy also. And some of the things that we're concerned about, I know a lot of us would like to be able to lock our exterior doors, immediately if there's some problem. And of course, probably none of us have that capability at the moment. And it's a very expensive process to go through, so that's a cost that we need to think about to control exterior and interior doors. I know 30 years ago when I started at Dyersburg State, we didn't spend anything on security, and now we're spending at least $130,000. That's one contract with Murray Guard. And there's no special appropriations for security. It's just something that adds to our administrative cost. And, it could be spent a lot of other ways if we weren't in this situation. But that concludes my report, and be happy to respond to any questions.
No, thank you. Very
Okay,
comprehensive. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dwight Murphy, representing our TCATs today.
Madam Chair, Chancellor, Board of Regents, I think I speak for every president and every director. We're very concerned about safety on our campuses. And with every shooting, with every notification, the anxiety increases from our students, from our visitors, from our faculty. So what I wanted to do today is tell you a little bit about where we are. And I've given you a handout that's got a summary. We didn't put ours on the PowerPoint because it's 2 pages long with all our sites. But I think the summary identifies that we must do better. We have school cast in many of our schools, or most of our schools, but that's about the extent of where we're at across the board. We lack intercoms in most of our schools, advanced notifications in our schools. So we have a lot, and again, look at the summary. We're identifying that we need to do a better job than we're doing. The second thing that came as a surprise to me, we're doing pretty well with the Promise and Reconnect, and we have 27 main campuses. But if you look at your second handout, we're teaching at 75 additional locations. We're teaching at 102 locations. Some of those are full campuses. Some of them may be one class. And so security is very difficult in what we're doing. Now, what we are doing, we're trying to individually on campuses, we're trying to do drills and training, and we're going to improve on that. Our Vice Chancellor said we're going to do a better job with that. We've established a committee to look at training resources that are out there. Run, Hide, and Fight has been sent out to all of our folks. I know Dr. Sisk at Jackson has brought in the FBI to do training. At my campus, I brought in local police departments to do training. So we're trying to reach out to the folks that can assist us and give the training to our folks that's needed. We're creating safety plans of what folks need to do in a tornado or a lockdown or that kind of drill. And as I said, we have schoolcasts, but that's all of our schools basically have. We email, cell phone, text, home mail, home phone. But in many of our classes, we ask the students to turn their phones off when they come in. So that becomes a little ineffective. What we need effective warning systems that we can alert the campus automatically. That takes money. You know, at my Oneida and Huntsville campus, we have intercoms that's school-wide. Knoxville, the big campus, we don't have. And we can't notify our students all at the same time. Most of us don't have effective camera systems. In Knoxville we do, but most schools don't. That's additional money that we need for security. We have in Knoxville, in Nashville, and Memphis, we have post-certified folks on campus. At Knoxville, I have an off-duty police officer from 7:30 to 10:30 at night. I don't have that luxury, as most of the smaller schools don't have that luxury on their campuses. We keep the same officers all the time, and that has lowered the anxiety level as much as anything we've ever done. Wish every TCAT had that opportunity to have post-certified folks on campus. Lockdown remotely, you know, we've talked about that, but we have so many points of entry. You've been on our campuses. I mean, if it's a diesel program, they probably got 4 bay doors, 2 walk doors. It's impossible in a lockdown situation to get everything locked down very quickly. So that's a thought that we would do. Statewide safety training, and I think Dr. Goodman would agree, we got to do better with that, and we intend to do better with that as TCATs. Risk assessments on safety plans, we need to do better with that. We recognize we're not where we need to be. And we are committed as TCATs to do a better job. But at the bottom line, as administrators, it's the toughest thing we face is securing the safety of our students, our staff, and our visitors. I think every one of us lose sleep and worry about that every day. If there's a noise out of bounds on campus, you jump automatically to try to do something. That concludes my report, subject to questions.
Questions, comments from Mr. Murphy, Regent Prescott?
Just thank you for the report, all of you, really, because we all know that at the end of the day, we have to do everything we can do, and something can still happen. We all recognize that. I'm looking at this chart here, and just particularly looked at Memphis, and it says there are no post-certified police on campus, but is it safe to say that in the TCATs where there are no certified police, no employees that can carry, that in the event of incidents, you are depending upon the area police force?
Local police departments. And again, you would have Knoxville, Memphis, and Nashville, the only post-certified that have post-certified folks on campus.
Okay.
Other questions?
Regent Griscom?
So, Dwight, when something happens, if you don't have intercoms or other means of communication, how do you all, if something happens on one of your campuses, how do you know that you've had an incident? How do you know and go about informing people, getting in a situation where there is a lockdown or something going on, if there's such an inadequate ability, as you've said, to have means of communicating?
Well, of course, the intercoms would work on campuses that have them, but that's limited. Schoolcast, we would hit the schoolcast immediately and hope that would carry through. They get an email, they get a text, they get a cell phone call. And so that's right now our main line of defense on security is schoolcast or like systems like schoolcast.
Like you pointed out, because I've been in your classrooms and many of the others, a lot of these classrooms, those cell phones are checked and away from the students the entire time of the class. I mean, many teachers have that in So you don't really have those if you're in a classroom, a lot of them.
That's correct. Other questions? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. That was enlightening. Thank you very much. Vice Chancellor Gregory?
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you to our presidents and director who've begun to give you an overview. We're now going to move into a little bit deeper look at this by looking at more of the operational and training issues that occur on our campuses. And I'd like to invite our panelists, if they would, to come to the table. And Madam Chairman, there's a gentleman sitting just in behind me, and if he'll hold his hand up here in a minute, who reached out to me about 5 years ago. His name is Chief Jack Cottrell, and Jack is our Chief of Police at East Tennessee State University. And he said, David, we need somebody to help us, somebody at the board to give us some thought and some attention. And I just have a tremendous amount of respect for Chief Cottrell. And if you get the opportunity to talk to him, Jack, would you just hold your hand up? He's a true professional in our system and a wonderful person. I just asked him to be a part of kind of supporting what you're about to see with others of our chiefs as we go a little bit deeper into this discussion. I might introduce the panelists to you. They will make some brief remarks and then also give you the opportunity to interface with them. First of all is Mr. Bruce Harbor. Bruce is a member of the University of Memphis staff, and he has been such since January of 2000. And since 2014, he's been serving as the Assistant Vice President for Administration and Chief of Police, where he oversees the university's crisis management program, process improvement initiatives, the university district, neighborhood, and business partnerships, and the Shared Services Center and business and finance functions at the Lambeth campus. And previous to his role, Bruce was the Director of Public Safety, Chief of Police for the university. He holds a master's degree in strategic leadership as well as a bachelor's of professional studies, both in police administration, both from the University of Memphis. Also joining us as a part of the panel is Chief Thomas Stefano. Chief Stefano is our Chief of Police at Roane State Community College. Chief Stefano has a very distinguished past, most recent of which he was the Chief of Staff and Deputy Federal Coordinating Officer, United States Department of Homeland Security, Federal Emergency Management Agency. And Director Murphy needs no further introduction. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Stefano. Let me just say this, Madam Chairman, members of the Regents. Both Chief Stefano as well as Chief Harbor have made a similar presentation to the state legislature at their request. So you're hearing some of the things that they actually, the members of the General Assembly heard as well. So Chief Stefano.
Good afternoon. My name is Tom Stefano, and I am the Chief of Police of Roane State Community College located in eastern Tennessee. First, I'd like to thank Governor Haslam and his staff, Chancellor Morgan, the distinguished TBR board, and Roane State Community College President Dr. Chris Whaley, along with my colleagues that comprise the Tennessee Chiefs of Police Association, for taking the time to renew current initiatives in safety, security within the Tennessee college and university system. Our combined initiatives of keeping our community colleges and universities throughout the state of Tennessee safe in order to keep our most treasured resource, our children, teachers, and guests, protected while attending our institutions of higher learning. With the advent of terrorism, both foreign and now happening domestically, here in the U.S., a reasonable person is cognizant of the fact that these incidents could also occur in our daily lives here in the state of Tennessee. More and more, we are dealing with individuals lashing out at an unsuspecting society using an active shooter platform as their way of hurting people. No community can expect to eliminate crime, but a collaborative effort among the college and university chiefs of police are strongly committed to providing resources that promote personal safety, campus security, and a safe environment for all that attend. Roane State's college campus safety and security program includes a number of professional, educational, and preventative components to include emergency and crisis management planning, security alert systems, emergency response and notification to staff and students, enhanced surveillance of our common areas, availability of emergency phones, weather, fire, intruder training, use of anonymous tip lines, ID cards, and key control, along with police security protective escort services and building access controls, are just a few of the programs that currently are in play. The definition of an active shooter as defined by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security is: a shooter is an individual actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill people in a confined and other populated area. In most cases, active shooters use firearms, and there is no pattern or method to their selection of victims. Active shooter situations are unpredictable and evolve quickly. As a result, Americans, specifically law enforcement and the educational system, have reacted and partnered in the best way that they know how in order to minimize the harm and suffrage inflicted by these horrible acts of violence. Aggressive awareness training has been brought to the forefront of our fight against these heartless actions. Law enforcement is no longer just a reactionary response participant and has taken a tenuous posture in partnering with school systems throughout the country to help train and educate private citizens to protect themselves, using awareness as their best advantage. Currently, we have adopted the federal government options model of run, hide, fight to impress upon all that if ever engaged in an active shooter event on campus, they would significantly increase their chances of survival by taking immediate positive action instead of not knowing what to do and being a static target. This level of awareness by an individual under the most strenuous conditions will conceivably take the advantage away from the active shooter, since a potential victim is removing themselves from a crime of opportunity to the shooter and now becoming instead a survivor. During the incident, the initial shock of what is happening runs through everyone's mind and can potentially set a course to panic which stifles protective actions. The residual of repetitive training instills the thought of immediate action and in times of crisis or imminent danger. As with most things, there is no one single plan that will fit every situation, and your plan should be based on your circumstances at the time. But it is important that every one of us should develop their own personal protection plan and teach the importance to having a plan to your kids. If something as detrimental as a shooting should ever happen near us, an option plan of run, hide, and fight encourages direct thought that most of the time running is preferable, hide only when running is not an option, and be ready to fight viciously at any moment. Currently, Roane State Community College certified police officers have an aggressive campaign in teaching this awareness program throughout the 9 college campuses and 13 other collateral institutions in their East Tennessee inventory, spanning over 9 counties. Additionally, we have partnered with other TBR institutions that employ armed and unarmed security officers to help train their responders. Due to the vast geography of our campus inventory, which it encompasses and in fact would take an inordinate amount of time for our small police force to respond to in the event of an active shooter situation in an outlying campus setting, we have entered into memorandums of understanding, or MOUs, with most partnering local law enforcement agencies in a particular campus jurisdiction. Drawing on my years of experience as a local municipality chief of police, I found early on that most law enforcement usually only know where schools are located in their district, and that most officers had never actually been through the variety of buildings and floors of their schools. This was due to the limited amount of calls at those venues, and generally the school was supervised by a single law enforcement school resource officer, or SRO. History has shown that most active shooter situations generally consume only about 15 minutes. With that said, it is imperative that responding law enforcement officers be acquainted with the building's entrances and exits and levels of nuances so that no time is wasted on a geography lesson during an actual encounter. Through the course of our training, we have recognized the true value of training with those local law enforcement agencies that encompassed our campuses as being vital to the response mission. Second, we have sent all local 911 dispatch centers detailed maps of the campus locations in their particular jurisdiction, so that responding officers have been afforded vital responding information such as dimensions, entry and exit areas, potential escape routes, electrical panels, and stairway locations. I had another segment here devoted to all of the other things that we do, but Dr. Boyd and a few of the other members have already covered that. So the last item I'd like to touch on is the thought of proposed gun legislation allowing staff, students, and others to carry weapons on our college settings. There are many points of views on this subject, but the shortfalls of this legislation would severely hinder our police protective response. As a member of the University Committee of the Tennessee Chiefs of Police Association, we routinely speak about these areas of concern and best practices. The general consensus of the professional law enforcement administrators on this subject is that introducing additional civilian firearms on campus would potentially create catastrophic issues for our professionally trained police responders. A few examples would be: most people attending school are in plain clothes with no identifying characteristics, so most police responders will treat the gun holder as a potential threat during an active shooter response. Although some people may have been trained in a former setting such as military or gun clubs, firearms training is a perishable skill. Police officers are constantly training and required to qualify annually, and most receive specialized SWAT training from FBI and DHS on active shooter scenarios. Additionally, most civilian concealed weapons permit holders may not have had the experience of stress control under fire, or have had formalized training in legal issues of when to shoot or not to shoot. Police employ advanced tactics to mitigate an active shooter. Police officers are trained to respond to active gunfire employing advanced cover and concealment techniques. The potential of boundless civilian personnel carrying weapons will hinder the reaction time of the officers responding, as each person the police officer encounters carrying a weapon would need to be cleared and identified that they were not involved. The last common denominator is officer safety. As the police officer is responding, other weapons holders could create safety concerns for the responding officer by becoming caught in a crossfire situation, firing from behind the officer, or the civilian possibly firing upon another civilian utilizing their firearm. I draw on my years of experience with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, and have found that the government's regulation of personnel being allowed on federal property, courthouses, police stations, and commercial aircraft have greatly reduced the incidence of additional armed confusion. In summation, this is just a small informational statement of how we do business to protect the citizens that enjoy Roane State Community College. Had time permitted, I would have explained about the extensive camera systems employed, biannual semester emergency drills, staff, faculty, and student web-based and practical training, personal safety awareness programs, all hazards, crisis management planning, the Roane State Community College Threat Assessment Team, and the level of mandatory police officer training with agencies such as FBI, DHS, and our local and state law enforcement partners. Most of the information I've shared with you today can be located on the Roane State Community College website under Police. I thank you for your time and energies and stand by to answer any questions you may have.
Chief Arbor.
Thank you. I was the last one to arrive and probably didn't get the message to turn off my phone, and I'm glad that I didn't, because as I was sitting back there, I got a tweet. I got a tweet that read, "Report of an active shooter spotted at the Student Union, Arkansas State." For some of us, that's fairly close to home. Everyone should evacuate to the west side of the building and clear the area. This is something that we're living with daily. One of the issues that the media has created for us, and Chief Stefano mentioned it just a minute ago, is panic. By putting these messages out before all the information is gathered, it causes additional stress and demands on the institutions and their law enforcement agencies. This turned out to be what I'm getting in an update about 30 minutes later. It was an armed person on the campus, but it was not an active shooter. There were no shots fired. If you remember the incident, I believe it was in late August at Mississippi State. They locked down the campus, had a report of an active shooter. It was not. They had a student who was in an emotional crisis, who had made a phone call. There, the information got relayed from the Mississippi State Police to the campus police, and a broadcast was put out with information from the Mississippi State Police that they had an active shooter on campus. They did not have a shooter. They did not even have a weapon on campus. You had just a student who was in crisis, which most of us deal with, I won't say daily, but quite regularly. And that's one of the things that that we do, and I think my role here today, and I'm glad, as Vice Chancellor Gregory said, Chief Cottrell is here also. I'm representing the four-year institutions and going to give you just a briefing of what we are doing to try to prepare. I'm jumping probably to my closing statement first, but we are dealing with an environment of fear, and that's coming from students and faculty. I got an email message, I believe yesterday, that went to me and our president, Dr. David Rudd, where a student, I believe she's a senior, is afraid to come to class, she says, because of these active shooter and other incidents. And as I've mentioned, not all of them are active shooter, but to the students, it doesn't matter. The response is going to be the same. It's just we've got to get the terminology correct first. I'm also getting requests regularly from faculty members saying, what are we going to do to secure the classrooms? As Dr. Boyer mentioned, we've talked about trying to secure the classroom doors so that they remain locked at all times. I actually went to their campus and did an assessment in 2003 to look at what they had in place, and I'm glad to see that they're doing that. I believe that's the direction that all of us are headed in higher ed, is that someday, probably not in our careers, but all the doors will be locked, much as they are in elementary, middle, and high schools. Students may have to wear an ID as they move around. We do that in some of our remote sites, such as our law school downtown, our new community health building. I think that's going to become more widespread, and we'll also see that our schools are going to have, our universities and colleges are going to have to be more secured. I believe that's where we're headed. There is a tremendous cost that goes along with that, but again, we are dealing with quite a bit of fear on a day-to-day basis. I am, Dr. Rudd is, our provost, Dr. West is, to the point that we are putting together a training program right now that's going to involve me and our assistant chief and me, one of our faculty members who helps us with crisis management, and the local FBI to go and do about an hour training session. We're going to offer it to all of our academic departments, to the chairs and faculty first, because faculty are the constant. As we know, students should come and go, but faculty are the constant. Adjunct faculty are a real stretch where we've got to reach them so that everyone knows what to do if we get into a situation where, as Chief Stefano mentioned, we have to run, hide, or fight. A lot of what we're doing, staffing has already been addressed. We do use post-certified officers on our campus in Memphis and in Jackson. We also use Murray Guard. They are unarmed, to answer an earlier question. The Murray Guards are. We have them, in fact, we've got, I believe, 22 total Murray Guard that work with us on both of our campus, but that was up there earlier. Our officers, some of them are trained with AR-15 rifles. They're patrol rifle certified. Again, trying to be prepared because one of the things that we've learned in these incidents is handguns, and to kind of dovetail into what Chief Stefano was talking about, someone carrying a handgun with a permit is not going to be very effective in a situation involving, again, using the term active shooter. That's why law enforcement has had to go to other types of weapons, rifles, long guns, to try to combat or counter those types of situations. We have mutual assistance agreements also with the Memphis PD, with the Jackson PD. We have radio interoperability, that was mentioned earlier. Obviously, the post-certified training for our officers. We've been doing active shooter training on our campus since the early 2000s. In 2012 and 13, we did some multi-agency training with the FBI, Secret Service, and local law enforcement in realistic simulated exercises. There was another comment made earlier, I believe it was from Austin Peay's president, about we have to stay, about their connection with local law enforcement. We're to the point now that I actually have a seat at the executive board on the Joint Terrorism Task Force with the FBI in Memphis, so that we can try to stay aware of any threats, because what we're seeing now is the threat that 2 months ago was an active shooter threat only is now also a fear of an act of terrorism, like we saw in San Bernardino just a few days ago. So that's become an even more critical role. We not only have to stay connected with local law enforcement, we've got to stay connected with at the federal level also. As far as our alert systems that are in place, we do have the TigerTech system, which is OmniAlert. Cost us about $20,000 annually. It's about that's for 20,000 licenses. We use email. We use the outdoor warning system, which will allow us tone, sirens, recorded messages, and live messages. The question came up, or the comment earlier, about students being required to turn off their cell phones in class. One thing that we've done, and that obviously is the professor or the instructor's prerogative, but if you do that, and we're encouraging our students to sign up for our text messaging system, and we also, if we send a Tiger text message, it also hits Twitter, because that's where the students are. That's where young people are. They're out on social media. We have many more students we reach through social media than we do through our Tiger text program. But if the instructor requires students to turn that alert system off on their phones, then I think the responsibility shifts to the professor. One way that we've tried to work with that is that if, for example, here, if you were logged in, as most of our classrooms are now, to a university network and using PowerPoint or the internet to teach your course, we have an alert system that overrides whatever you're doing on a computer. If you're working in your office as an employee, it overrides the university network, and you cannot do anything else until you hit acknowledge by hitting the enter key. And it's the same message that goes out on our Tiger text message. So that's one way that we've tried to, I guess, help eliminate that issue where students may not feel comfortable because they've had to turn off their phones. Emergency planning, as Chief Stefano mentioned, we use an all hazards comprehensive approach. We have a specific appendix in our crisis management manual that addresses active shooters, telling people what to do. And then we've got, as the Chief mentioned, a tremendous amount of resources on our website. All of us tend to use the DHS, the Homeland Security model, which is run, hide, fight, the recommendations. We've also done we do semi-annual exercises. This year in the spring we did civil unrest, which could be a riot demonstration type scenario. And then on November 12th, and I think this is critical, we did a campus shooter scenario that was attended not only by our operations group, which are those of us in police services, physical plant, housing, media, pretty much reaching the entire campus, but our executive, the President's Council, which is our policy group under our plan. Dr. Rudd, the provost, the vice presidents also attended, and we all went through a tabletop exercise so that in an incident such as that, if we have to activate our emergency operations center, that everyone knows what their role is, the policy group, the president, and the operations group. And we think that's extremely important to get everyone on campus involved. We have to have support at the top for these operations to work in the event. We have to activate that. Other things, we've got safety escorts that we provide. Silent witness, we have anonymous reporting also. Getting into another area, the sexual assault resources. I mentioned that we're working on some on-demand training. And then one of the most critical roles, as I alluded to with the Mississippi State incident, is how do we deal with our students who are in crisis? And most of the institutions probably have some type of similar model. We call ours the Behavioral Intervention Team. It's made up of legal, student affairs, Office of Student Conduct, police services, the counseling unit, and a few others. We meet every week at 3:30 on Monday afternoon, and we keep our students on the list until we feel comfortable with moving them off. There can be actions taken depending on the severity of the act or the frequency that lead up to suspension. A lot of times what we end up doing is mandating counseling. Again, just some things we can do proactive to hopefully, if we've got a student that might be headed down that road, again talking about one of these violent type encounters, that we can stop it before it ever gets to that point. And again, that board can mandate counseling. One specific concern, and then I'll close and go to Mr. Murphy, is classroom doors. we are looking at what we're going to have to do. We're an older institution. We have a lot of older buildings, as I'm sure a lot of our colleagues do. It's going to cost between, and I got a quote last week from Physical Plant because of the number of emails I'm getting from faculty, staff, and students about security. It's going to cost between $350 and $1,500 per door. We've got about 500 doors that we are going to be looking at. To get in compliance with ADA, fire, and all the other codes, we're just going to have to spend the money. But I think it's a necessity. We're going to have to do it because one of the things I do is I speak to the incoming freshman parents every year, and that takes probably 20 sessions to get all of them through. This is a hot topic with parents also. They want to know what we're doing to make sure that their students are safe when they're on our campus. You know, the questions used to be primarily sexual assault, maybe alcohol, you know, the things that we've been dealing with for years. Now the parents want to know, how prepared are we to handle any type of emergency response? So with that, I'll close, and we'll be here for questions in a few minutes.
I'm not sure why I'm here with these experts. But just to make a point, we had a student that had gone through 2 of our programs at Oneida. Most of you know I'm from rural Scott County, and we think things never happen where we're at, that we're safe. My phone blew up about 2 months ago with faculty and folks texting me, had I heard about a student that had left our school, had graduated, thank goodness, and held all his neighbors at bay and about 6 or 7 police officers. So there's no campus that's immune to this problem. And we have been, as I said, we have 102 training sites. We've been blessed not to have any major instance. And I think today really brings to all of our attention, from the chancellor down and the governor down, that we need to do a better job. Because if things happen on our campus, they're going to look at administration. And so I think, again, it's our commitment to do better. We need, and I'm going to come back to funding, Chancellor, we're going to need some funding to fix some of these things through the capital maintenance or whatever. But there's a responsibility. We have developed relationships with our local police departments. In all 3 of my campuses in particular, we've toured the school with them. They have access keys to our campus, but that's not enough. They're 10 or 15 minutes away in most cases. So I think the awareness, the training, the early intervention is something that we all have to be very aware of and that we're all very responsible for.
Regent Prescott? Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Wait,
please.
thank you. Go ahead, Regent Prescott.
Thank you for recognizing me. I'm wondering if, Mr. Harbour, you could speak to the last issue that Mr. Stefano spoke to in terms of the impact that licensed gun owners being able to be on campus with their weapons, students and so forth, would have. If you have a similar view on that?
I agree completely with what Chief Stefano said. Let me start by saying, when you talk about impact, I think one of the real misconceptions, as this has been addressed with legislatures across the country, is that there is no financial impact. There is a financial impact, because what it's going to do, and there was an article recently that it's going to cost the University of Texas system about $30 million, 31 over 6 years. So if anyone says there's not a financial impact, we need to dig a little deeper, or ask them to dig a little deeper. Where that comes into play is with our security systems that may have to be updated or upgraded because of having the additional weapons on campus. What we see happening, and Chief Stefano alluded to this also, is we're going to start to get, because of this fear and uneasiness, and it is extremely difficult, and I've been in law enforcement for 40 plus years now, 25 with the Memphis PD and now 16 with the university. Even for officers, it's extremely difficult to conceal a weapon all the time, and especially when you're sitting in a classroom. And we think it's going to increase the calls for service which is going to require either us to not do things that we're currently doing or hire additional officers. And we also think it's going to increase the calls for service to other agencies, which we don't bear the direct cost for. And then there's the whole safety issue that he mentioned. There are studies out there that have shown that people without law enforcement training, they don't respond as effectively, and I'll put it that way, in those types of incidents, because officers, we go through, I did mine about 3 weeks ago, shoot, don't shoot training. When you can shoot, when you can't, and one of the things you have to look at is what's the background, what's your field of fire, what are you likely to hit if you miss. And there are actually some videos out there where they've done some studies on ABC News with some college students, some of whom were quite proficient with handguns and had been through quite a bit of training, over the course of their young life, and how they were firing rounds. They were using paint rounds that they didn't even remember firing, and just barely missing other students in the scenario. So I think, permits on campus, and I'll close with this, is a very simple solution to a very complex problem, if I'm saying that correctly.
Well, I appreciate that. And just as a comment, I do think that this is something, I know we're going to look at, I hate to get into a political conversation, and we're going to be looking at our legislative agenda. But it's something I think that we have to think about, because interesting that you brought up the financial aspect. That might be something that sways somebody. But the safety aspect is the thing that concerns me, because we all know that trained law enforcement individuals are not always able to respond in the way that they should. And so how much more is that a case with students? And I just don't think we can pass on this issue. I think we need to think about it, and we need to know what we believe about it, or what we believe about it, but it has to be based, I think, on the opinions of the kind of expertise that we're hearing today,
Right.
because I
Right.
don't know. I've never shot a gun. I could probably, I've wanted to shoot somebody before, but I've never shot a gun. But I think the only way we can, there we go. My husband is not safe. But I think, in all laughter aside, the only way we can be persuasive is to do it with expertise, with the people that know and understand and have data and can really speak with that kind of authority. So I really appreciate this conversation today. And that was going to be my question that I asked, and so I was pleased that you answered that. But I just don't think it's something we can pass on. Well said.
May I
Regent
follow?
Griscom?
Before, David, you sort of conclude the piece, with all of the incidents that we're seeing in the media about shootings, not just on college campuses, but in communities, and where there's questions about whether the officer, had a reason to fire a weapon. And you're talking about, like in Chattanooga where I live, they're talking about trying to put, body cams on officers and things, so you at least have evidence and things. I've got to assume that for you all, that, and the situation you're in, being able to have that kind of real-time video or whatever, so you're able to sort of verify or justify or whatever act you take. And I'm interested in, because we've heard a lot about the lack of a lot of surveillance equipment or contact people. What about that notion of being able, when somebody comes in and says, I think you took an inappropriate action, your officer did, how are you all thinking about that, and what concern or approach do you think we need to be thinking about as regents to make sure that when you do your job, that you at least have some semblance of information that can sort of support the action that was taken?
It's a very good question. At Roane State, we're very fortunate that over the years we've been able to develop a very extensive and elaborate surveillance type of system throughout all of our campuses. Being a municipality chief, our greatest fear as administrators is having a police officer do something out there that we can't justify, or that they acted out of the scope of their employment. Everybody's fallible. It doesn't matter how much training you have. It doesn't matter where you come from. Certain instances dictate, just the moment, the heat of the moment as to what the reaction is going to be. In getting back to your question, I believe, based on the scenario that I'm currently in now, being the chief at Roane State, I would be a strong proponent of making sure that all of our campuses are as well equipped as Roane State is, as far as the camera systems are in place. Not just for, of course, the advantages that you're talking about. We solve many, many, many small crimes based on camera footage. You can't dispute it. There's always the he said, she said. There's always an expert in the room. There's always an attorney lurking around the corner, looking to play the game 2 years after this has already been done. But when you bring in that camera footage into a courtroom and you let a jury or you let a judge see this, you can't dispute it. It's there. So again, I understand how expensive this is. I mean, I know what we've gone through and what President Whaley, has had to sign, based on the say-so of, we believe that this is a benefit for the institution. But from our standpoint, we can justify everything that, we've used that system for. So.
Yeah, interesting.
And let me add briefly, we are looking at body cameras as far as the university, the department, providing them right now. Several of our officers have purchased their own because they believe in them and they know that generally it's going to be in the officer's benefit to have them. The hidden cost as we move forward, though, is the server space, and there's some legal issues that have to come up. How long do you maintain those, especially if they're going to be evidence? The astronomical costs that have held some agencies back are tied to the storage. Uploading them and then keeping them is, again, it's exorbitant. So,
Regent Markham, I think you had a question or a comment?
Yes, thank you very much, Vice Chairman. First of all, I want to say thank you so much for bringing this very timely report to the board's attention. I think today we've taken a good hard look at safety and security on our campuses, and it's a very important thing that we do. I think we've seen some things we didn't. It's hard to look at. It's hard to see our shortcomings, and we know we have some things we need to fix. And I want to thank you guys, chiefs, for laying your life on the line for us. We appreciate that very much, and we know that our faculty and staff do the same when they go to school too. So we thank you for all you do. One thing I heard from the committee is that there are many different needs: cameras, more certified security on campus. But one thing I heard that Dr. Boyer pointed out was that she has no special appropriation for security. We need to work on that. We need to talk to the legislature. We need to make sure that there's a line for this. Security is never more important today than it has been in the past, but it's been very important in the past, but we need to work very hard, and hopefully, David, you'll help us bring that to their attention.
Sure.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Well said, Regent Markham. Thank you for bringing this to us today. To Chief Cottrell, first of all, thank you for being the one who spoke up and got us all on this track. It's clearly very important, and it's become, as Regent Markham just said, even more important as the months and the years roll by. We have had a candid discussion, a sobering discussion, but a very important discussion. And to the three of you, thank you for offering your time and talent. You all are pros. And I know, as difficult as this issue is, I will say that all of us, frankly, will sleep better tonight knowing that there are folks like you on our campuses who take this to heart and take care of our students, our faculty, our staff, and administration each and every day. Our heartfelt thanks. Thank you. We will pick back up at this juncture with some unfinished business, and that is approval of revisions to the bylaws, which we worked on at our ad hoc committee on committee meeting last month. You have had notice of our intent to make some bylaw revisions. Mary, would you like to highlight those for us? And let me add that the Chancellor and I both went back and looked at these revisions in light of the governor's proposal and any potential legislative action on that going forward. It's my belief in reading them again, and correct me if I'm wrong, that these revisions are still a good and necessary cleanup for us at this juncture. And of course, should we have changes going forward, these will still, I believe, withstand the test of time and are probably a little bit overdue in cleaning up some of these matters. So I'll give you my bias from the get-go. But Madam Secretary, would you fill us in a little bit more?
Okay, we have 5 proposed revisions to the bylaws, and I'll just briefly tell you what each one of them is. If anybody has any questions, you've had the materials and the text of the proposed revisions. If anybody has questions as we go through, just stop me and I'll get more detailed about the explanations if you need that. The first proposal is to subsection Roman numeral 4G3, which pertains to when a record vote is called for, and it just clarifies when a record vote is called for. The previous version referred to any vote on an allocation or expenditure of funds, and there was often confusion about what that meant, and so we attempted to make it clearer in the proposed revision. The second proposed revision is to subsection Roman numeral 7L, which pertains to student and faculty regents. And what we have, the proposed revision reflects our current practice in having visiting, when we're visiting on the campuses, having student and faculty, not regents, but representatives on the committees. I misspoke there. It doesn't have to do with the student and faculty regents. It has to do with student and faculty representatives on the committees. And the existing bylaw was required them to be appointed to standing committees and attend every committee meeting, which was expensive and burdensome. And so our actual practice is what's reflected in the proposed revision, which is when we visit and have a meeting on a college or university campus, then the hosting institution and the institutions in the area will be invited to have representatives, which is what we do now. The third revision is to Roman numeral 8A1, which pertains to the officers of the board, and it again is to reflect our current practice. The current version provides that the officers of the board shall be the chairman, vice chairman, chancellor, treasurer, and secretary. Those are still the officers of the board, but we're adding a sentence to that provision to provide that the sitting governor of the state of Tennessee shall serve as the chairman of the board, which is since the board was formed in 1972, the chairman has always been the sitting governor of the state of Tennessee. So that's just a proposal to reflect what the practice has been all these years. The fourth proposed amendment is to Roman numerals 8B2, which has to do with election of those officers. And what it does is does away with the term limit. And then the fifth proposed revision is to Roman numeral 8E1, which provide the original version. The chairman shall be a member of the board, shall preside at the meetings with the authority to vote, and shall appoint the chairman and members of all committees. And since the chairman has always been the governor really doesn't have time to appoint the chairs and committee members. So in reality, the vice chair has always had that responsibility and done that. So the proposed revision just reflects that in consultation with the chairman, the vice chair will appoint committee chairs and members. So those are the 5 proposed revisions. Does anybody have any questions about any of those proposals?
Hearing no questions, could we have a motion to approve? Thank you. Regent Freeman, a second. Regent Duckett, thank you. Because this is a bylaw change, we do need a roll call vote.
Regent Apple,
Yes.
Regent Deaton. Oh, he doesn't vote, I'm sorry. Regent Duckett.
Aye.
Regent Farwell.
Aye.
Regent Freeman.
Aye.
Regent Griscom.
Aye.
Regent Markham.
Aye.
Regent Prescott.
Aye.
Regent Reynolds.
Aye.
Regent Roddy.
Aye.
Regent Russell.
Aye.
Regent Shockey.
Aye.
Regent Thomas.
Aye.
and Regent Barlin.
Aye.
The motion carries.
Thank you, and thanks to everybody for your good work in our ad hoc committee on committees meetings over these past few months. We now move to new business, and we have 2 items this afternoon. Our original agenda reflected 3. That third item on the private fundraising report has been deferred to our March meeting, so we will hear more then. Vice Chancellor Sims, and then Carol Perrier, if you will follow on. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to start off the financial report. Financial report is
Sounds better that way.
usually you don't have a problem with me on this. The financial report is included within your board materials. This is just an informational item, so I won't go through the report that is in the materials itself. 3 years ago, though, the board did adopt a policy that provides for us to do a review, essentially a review of ratios of our institutions to get some sense of financial health of institutions. We basically follow a national model, the Composite Financial Index. It's a methodology that's been in existence for a better part of a decade now, has been updated periodically. This methodology really results in, or is based on an examination of 4 fundamental financial ratios. I'll run through those 4 real quickly. The primary reserve, which essentially is a liquidity measure. What are your resources on hand that you could use to meet immediate needs? Second ratio, return on net assets, which is essentially a growth in financial resources. Are we stagnant? Are we decreasing in terms of resources available? Are we growing the institution? A viability ratio, which is essentially is another form of a debt ratio, looking at are we managing our debt strategically? And then finally, net operating revenues, which is are we living within our means? Are we spending more than we bring in? So this methodology allows us to combine those ratios in a way that gets to a score that we can monitor over time. This is the second year that we've reported to you. The policy requires that we report to you by sector, so this won't be an individual institution by institution report. Would encourage you to understand that what at a staff level we attempt to do is look at the longer term trend. Any 1 year kind of change can be explained by activities on a campus, but what we really want to focus on are kind of directional issues. Are we headed in the right direction? So we'll start with our universities. The first ratio we'll look at is the primary reserve ratio. Each of the charts is set up somewhat similarly. The green bar is essentially a level at which we would say that we need to have conversation with an institution because they have a right, they are performing at a level that we would refer to as watch. The blue line represents, is referred to as expected, and that's probably too strong a term. That is essentially, from a national perspective, that is seen as kind of a best practice level. And then the red line is essentially our ratio for, in this case, universities. So on this chart, on primary reserve, the 0.4 that we would use as a desirable performance level essentially says that we would have 5 months of expenses on hand in terms of available resources. That's important in terms of disruption in cash flow. It's not unusual or not unheard of for us at mid-year to have a an impoundment of appropriations that we would not have expected. This is essentially the cushion that an institution would have to deal with unexpected circumstances. You can see in the university sector performing at an acceptable level, really in the top tier of what we would hope they would perform at. Next ratio, return on net assets. If you want to look at volatility, this is volatility. This is up and down. These are year by year numbers, so we don't do any smoothing to it. This number is heavily influenced by things such as market returns on investments. Probably in our scheme, it's more influenced by bringing new plant assets on board. So when we bring a new dormitory on board, when we bring a new classroom building on board, that impacts this ratio. You can clearly see, though, that performance has been above what we would hope for some period of time, although it is somewhat volatile. Viability ratio, this is one that, again, looks at debt. There are various ways you can look at that. This measure essentially looks at resources we have on hand and could we essentially fund that debt out, our accumulated debt on financial statement date. Not that we would ever fund out all our debt on financial statement date, but it does give you a picture of our expendable resources versus our debt. University sector is really the sector where we have substantial levels of debt, both current and non-current debt. You can see sort of a downward trend here. That is largely, again, attributable across our university sector. The last several years we have brought on several major residence hall projects, which has added to our debt. We would expect that this would stabilize over the next few years, but this is one of the trends that the staff here in the system office, in conversation with institutions, will be monitoring. Net operating revenues, you can see again some volatility there. In some respects, tracking where we were in terms of the Great Recession and kind of the recovery after the Great Recession. Again, exhibits an upward trend. Anything above a 1 or really anything above 0 represents that we are spending within our means. I'll focus on fiscal 12 for just a moment. The fact that we were below the ratio in that 1 year is not necessarily evidence of poor management. That can be an effort by institutions to implement new programs, essentially investing in infrastructure, whether it be people infrastructure or physical infrastructure, in order to build capacity going forward. So what this mechanism allows us to do is ask questions to which our institutions historically have been very successful at giving rational explanations as to why those occurrences take place. So the overall score for our universities in terms of the composite score, you can see again they're operating right up against the blue line, at least over the last 4 years, exhibiting a pretty steady trend there. I should say in terms of weighting, when it comes to actually looking at the composite score, 20% of the weight is given to the return on net assets, kind of long-term financial growth. 10% on net operating revenues, 35% on the very viability ratio. The largest weight, or one of the largest rates, is primary reserve. You might ask why the primary reserve is weighted so heavily here and even more heavily in the community colleges. The existence of liquid resources will allow you to bridge many circumstances that might be challenging short term. It really gives you that breathing room. That's why that within this methodology is heavily weighted. Moving to community colleges, similar set of charts there. I'll not editorialize on them as we move through them. Primary reserve, again, colleges operating at a more than acceptable level. Return on net assets, again, they're meeting our performance benchmarks. Viability ratio, they're blowing the roof out of this one, but it's because our colleges as a group don't really carry long-term debt, very small levels of long-term debt, so this mostly reflects short-term or current levels of obligations. Net operating ratio, again, you saw coming out of the recession, kind of a dip in that we are now recovering from, so operating in a way that we think is acceptable. And then their CFI score reflects the strength of the underlying ratios. The last sector we'll touch on then are TCATs. Primary reserve, that the first point when you look at fiscal 15, you can see that we're at kind of our watch level there. Want to make a comment there that I didn't mention this in the other sectors. We are implementing, this is the year that we've implemented a new accounting standard. We've had to book pension liability for the first time. The liability's already been there, but the accounting standard has changed, and now we're having to book that statement. That works against our current resources, so that largely explains the change that you've seen in terms of primary reserve ratio with our TCATs. That ratio even before was not as strong as it was in other sectors. We believe that the TCATs are aware of that. Not just believe, we understand, we know that they're aware of that, and there are plans in place to try to address that. I should say, if you'll back me up there, the weighting in the TCAT sector for this ratio is 55%. So this heavily weights their primary reserve in terms of calculating their score, their ultimate score. Composite financial index score, skipped over a couple, I guess. Back me up just one or two. Yeah, let's talk about return on net assets. This one was one that really points out we've brought several campuses or enhanced plant online in the last 2 years. The Clarksville facility, the Elizabethton facilities have come online. That heavily influences this ratio. Net operating revenues, again, you can see that they have improved that significantly over the last fiscal year. So their composite score, again, they are right at the top of what we would hope that they would be. Just in summary then, Madam Chair and members, final observations. Primary reserve decreased in all sectors, but that decrease is largely due to the change in accounting standards. All these numbers are taken from our financial statements that are ultimately audited, so we feel that there's a sound basis for that. Only below watch level in the TCAT sector, and again, we'll be having conversations with them about plans there. Viability, university sector is an area that we'll be watching over the next few years. During our institutional briefings that the Chancellor mentioned earlier, we're having some conversation about that as part of those discussions. Return on net assets, all well there. Next slide, when we talk about net operating revenues, again, living within our means, I think are reflected here, in the composite financial index score essentially is up in all sectors except universities, but even within the universities, their performance is well within the range that we would hope it would be. Madam Chair, I know I went through that relatively quickly. The short story on it is the monitoring system that you've established by policy we think is working. It's very impressive when we talk with both the presidents and the chief financial officers on campuses, the focus that they now have on understanding their financial performance as well as performance in other areas. With that, Madam Chair, I'll stand for questions, or I'll gladly yield to Dr. Purrier.
Questions, comments? All right, well done. Thank you. Thank you. Carol, the employer and alumni survey report for the TCATs, this was in everyone's books, so hopefully you've had a chance to review it. Okay. So hit some high spots for us on continued good news.
We will continue good news, and we will just hit the high points. On an annual basis, the Tennessee Colleges of Applied Technology will survey our graduates as well as employers to assess the effectiveness and relevance of our 50-plus program areas. And these surveys really do serve to help us direct not only the curriculum and content, but the delivery of instruction, development of appropriate technical skills, worker characteristics, and all of those components that are essential for success in today's workplace. The technical colleges continuously try to improve in our occupational programs and student services that significantly impact the economics, our students, and the economies of our communities. On the next slide, you'll note that in 2012 and 2013, we changed the way we collected the data. And we used to mail out. It used to be a huge thing where we would print envelopes and print letters and stuff them and mail them and those sorts of things. But in 2012 and 13, we moved a little ahead, and we changed that to where when students leave a campus, graduate, or for whatever reason have to leave, we started an interview process with them on what we call an exit interview. We still mail surveys to employers to get their information, so we have changed that a little bit, and the reason for that is that we were really trying hard to increase the number of returns that we have, and we have seen that in the past years. For this particular year, 2013-14, and these are always a year behind, the alumni and employer survey results, I feel like I should have a drum roll or something here, but the alumni rated the program preparation for employment satisfactory or above in 92% of the responses. The employers rated student performance satisfactory or above in 96 of the responses. So we do think that's something to be excited about and pretty positive. The next slide will talk about something we talk about all the time, and that's placement. And actually 13-14, we had 6,565 graduates that were available for job placement in their field. We placed 5,636 graduates, and so that's an overall of 86% placement rate. I am happy to tell you that the campuses have been working very hard. They have just turned in their COE report, or our accrediting agency for the Council on Occupational Education. Those numbers look great. So I think next year when we get this report, we'll even have higher numbers, or at least the same numbers to report. Of course, there is a limit on how high you can go, I think. The results of the alumni and employee surveys are shown in the material that you have previously received, and this is an informational item only. I'm happy to answer any questions, but it does not require a vote. And that concludes my report.
Questions? Go ahead, Regent Prescott.
Sorry, I'm just
No,
full.
this is good.
Did you tell us what your return rate on the employers was? On your, I like the fact that you're doing the exit interviews. I think that's a good strategy, but
I'm not sure I brought that down, Regent Prescott, but I will get that information for you. I don't think that's on my sheet. I'm sorry. How about another question? It's on my sheet. How about that?
Keep up the good work.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That concludes our informational reporting items. Dale Sims is back up as we move to action items.
Madam Chair, not as a threat, but I can drone on for hours and hours on the budget unless there's a motion to approve it, and that's always in order, I understand. Just kidding. I was hoping. The October revised budgets, let's go one here. You get to act on budgets 3 times a year. You act on them in July with the proposed budget for the next fiscal year. In June, you act on them for the next fiscal year. At this point in time, you act on this is a revision to the original budget. It takes into account things like the actual result of any maintenance fee increase that was approved or other fee actions, takes into account kind of final adjustments in the state budget, enrollment growth, things such as that. So this is your second bite at the apple, so to speak, with the budget. What I will go through is a high-level summary of over 33 pages or so of detailed tables within your board materials. I'll start with the next slide, which is the action at the end that we'll be recommending that you take, which is adopting a budget that recognizes unrestricted E&G expenditures of over $2 billion, a little over $800 million in restricted expenditures, $84 million in auxiliary and transfers of about $100 million for a total budget of over $3 billion. That would involve over 18,000 positions across the system, both restricted and unrestricted. Additional materials, we'll start with appropriation. This is essentially the material I'll walk through with you is essentially an apples to apples comparison of the revised budget that you adopted last year to the revised budget that we're recommending this year. So we start with our state appropriation from last year of $634 million. We reflect the different adjustments that have been made to that. Formula outcomes, we received almost $16 million more in the current year than in last year's budget. Salary improvement, that was the state funding for the 1.5% salary adjustment. And then legislative amendments, primarily two things there, $3.6 million for the Lambeth campus at University of Memphis, and a little over $5.3 million to essentially reimburse ETSU for its prior years of support for the Gray Fossil Site facility that they had to absorb out of their operating budget that was reimbursed to them by the state. So essentially, it's $37 million adjustment in our appropriations for a total then of $672 million in appropriations across the system. Revenue picture, we're up 6% in terms of appropriations. In terms of student fees in total, we're up about 4%. That's a combination of maintenance fee revenue being up 5%, a slight decrease in mandatory fees. As a reminder for members, that 5% negative 1%, several things have influenced that. One is the maintenance fee adjustments that you recommended or approved last year. Universities about 4% on average, community colleges about 3%, and similar for TCATs. Also, it's influenced by enrollment. We did see substantial enrollment increases at community colleges that drove additional revenues. And then in particular, you'll recall that at Tennessee Tech, we recommended and you approved incorporation of certain mandatory fees within their maintenance fees. So that negative or reduction of $897,000 represents in large part that action that was taken to move more of their fee structure into maintenance fees, kind of a simplification of their charging structure. Overall then, increase of $92 million year over year, about 2% in terms of total resources. Expenditure by function. I'll highlight maybe two items. One of them, student services, a 6% increase there. I think that reflects what you heard Dr. Denley speak about earlier in terms of intensive advising. And kind of related to that, a good bit of activity, particularly in the university sector in terms of student recruitment activities. So retaining and expenditures on recruitment of new students are reflected in that line. The 6% reduction in institutional support, largely what that is, and I should say 17% increase in O&M, operation and maintenance expenditures, that is largely where NACUBO is the National Association of College and University Business Officers. Their guidance on classification of police and safety, how we account for the spending there, was that we needed to move that from institutional support activities into operations and maintenance. So that adjustment really reflects an accounting shift as opposed to a real substantial increase in spend. In terms of spending by natural classification, salaries are up about 4%. Again, a combination of a 1.5% salary increase basically mandated by state government. The board was kind enough to supplement that by 2%, so essentially a 2% COLA. There were local salary increases that were approved as part of that based on local ability to pay. And then increase in census of employees would also drive that revised number. So increase of about 4% there, and if salaries go up 4%, your benefit expense trails it pretty closely. So at a high level, that top line unrestricted E&G, you've seen a good bit of detail on it. Auxiliaries, again, that's dining operations, housing operations, et cetera. We're looking at about a 7% increase there, again, largely driven by bringing more facilities online. Restricted revenue, which is, again, largely financial aid. This is funding that it comes from outside the system where the donor restricts its uses to given purposes. and then transfers I'll touch on in just a minute, but you can see kind of small change there. Transfer activity, just mentioned that. The top line there, that is our indebtedness. These are mandatory transfers to cover debt service. You can see that's up slightly. Unexpended plant, that looks like a big movement, but that is really about a static adjustment there. Essentially, we're moving from a point in 14-15 where we had pretty substantial contributions being made from our operating accounts to unexpended plant. We now see a slight bringing back in of those resources into our operating account, a little over $2 million. Also, I should say renewal and replacement, we're allocating, our institutions proposing to allocate additional money into R&R accounts. Getting into the short rows on this, Madam Chair and members, kind of summary of unrestricted funds, what we have available and what we're applying. I want to focus first of all on the top line, beginning fund balance of $332 million. Up until, Renee would correct me on this, I think 4 years ago, Renee, up until about 4 years ago, we had a pretty hard cap and told institutions you cannot carry more than 5% of your revenues in your unrestricted E&G. Well, what that drove was on June 30, they would propose moving money out of their unrestricted E&G that they needed to carry forward to spend on one-time purposes the following fiscal year. They would move it out one day, move it back in the next day. So we relaxed that rule and said if you have definitive spending plans for it in the succeeding fiscal year, let's not go through that transaction. Let's leave it in our operating account and explain it as to why those accounts may be overstated. So the $332 million is more than you would expect, and that's largely reflected when you look at the unrestricted E&G. You can see that we are spending about $115 million more than the current resources there, and that's largely attributable to those carry forwards of funds from the prior year into this year that there are plans for spending. Auxiliaries operating basically on a break-even basis, and then in total what we're reflecting is a spend down of our beginning balances of about $117 million, but still an ending unrestricted E&G balance of over $200 million. Last slide is where we began. This is again a high-level summary of the high-level summary we just walked through and of the materials within your board materials. We're recommending that you approve this budget for transmission to THEC and to the administration. Madam Chair, if I could, this is a result of a lot of activity across the system. Budget officers operating on a pretty short schedule at the same point in time that they're preparing financial statements, implementing a new accounting standard, developing a budget proposal for us. Renee Stewart, Alicia Gillespie, and Brooke Shelton here in the system office coordinating both those activities. A debt of gratitude from me and I think from the board to those folks. They're very diligent to people on campuses as well. The fall is not a very fun time for them, and we do appreciate their efforts. With that, Madam Chair, I'll stand for any questions you may have.
Any questions? Thank you to all the budget officers and all that good work. Thank you for giving them a pat on the back. It is well deserved. Folks, this requires a roll call vote. We need a motion to approve. Thank you, Regent Freeman. Thank you, Regent Markham. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Mary, would you please call the roll?
Aye.
Excuse me, Regent Apple. Regent Duckett. Aye. Regent Farwell.
Aye.
Regent Freeman. Aye. Regent Griscom. Aye. Regent Markham. Aye. Regent Prescott.
Aye.
Regent Reynolds.
Aye.
Regent Roddy.
Aye.
Regent Russell.
Aye.
Regent Shockey. Regent Thomas.
Aye.
Regent Varlin.
Aye.
The motion carries.
Thank you. Dale, you were back up. We have done this once, I think, at the University of Memphis.
If you do it once, it's better to do it more than once,
Okay,
right?
okay.
Yeah.
Take us through this, please, sir.
I'll try to do this relatively quickly. You'll recall, as Vice Chair just mentioned, University of Memphis came to us with a request to implement essentially a special out-of-state tuition rate. That rate equals the per-student state subsidy for the prior fiscal year. So it's kind of a set amount. It's an amount that we can calculate, and we know exactly what that amount is. They wanted to apply that rate to students graduating from high schools within 250 miles of their main campus. The board approved that, and as part of that approval, essentially created, we refer to it internally as an R250 plan, a recruitment focus area 250 plan. The board's action was to permit other institutions to adopt this plan. It was not imposed on anyone, but if an institution felt like it was in their interest to adopt the plan, they could make that request. So today we have a request from both MTSU and Austin P to adopt those plans. Those are before you today with our recommendation to approve. They're consistent with your prior action. If I may as well, the prior action of the board also was that the board reserved the right or the authority to approve these requests unless otherwise delegated. Our recommendation as part of this is that the board delegate to the chancellor authority to approve these plans in the future. Situations we can end up with, these plans are extremely valuable, but you need time to market. So waiting until June, et cetera, to adopt the plan if there's a request is doesn't really let them fully implement. So our recommendation is, as long as it meets the parameters adopted by the board in its previous action, that the chancellor be authorized to approve those plans. If they don't fit those parameters, then we would bring it back to the board for action. So with that explanation, I'll be glad to stand for questions. I think this requires a roll call vote.
Yes. So we need a motion to approve the two plans, Austin P and MTSU.
I think you can a motion to adopt the staff recommendation, I think would incorporate
With
all
the,
three.
With the delegation to the chancellor. Right, exactly. Thank you, Regent Duckett.
Second.
Regent Roddy, the second. Any further discussion or questions? Hearing none. Mary, would you please call the roll?
Regent Apple. Aye. Regent Duckett.
Aye.
Regent Farwell.
Aye.
Regent Freeman.
Aye.
Regent Griscom.
Aye.
Regent Markham. Regent Prescott.
Aye.
Regent Reynolds.
Aye.
Regent Roddy.
Aye.
Regent Russell.
Aye.
Regent Shockey. Regent Smith. Excuse me. Regent Thomas.
Aye.
Regent Varlin.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. All right, gang. So take a big sip of water. Have a Hershey bar. Stretch for a second if you need to.
Oh, please.
This is a very important part of the program, and we're moving into the late afternoon.
please.
But our legislative update as we look at our proposed legislative package. Vice Chancellor Gregory.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. With all due respect, Chancellor Sims is acting like it's his birthday.
Oh.
This is the this is the legislative agenda, and just to make sure everybody feels the routine of what's going on here. Each December, we present an item to this board as the Board of Regents legislative agenda for the upcoming legislative session. It is an action item that we ask you to take at the conclusion of the recommendation. It's important, I think, for me to say just a word about how it's formulated and how it's built, because it begins with Chancellor Morgan each fall asking the presidents and directors for suggestions and ideas. We are somewhat fortunate in the sense that I would call the higher education statutory scheme in Tennessee fairly simple. So it's not like there are pieces, moving parts that need to be changed and manipulated each year. There are certain policy issues, and certainly we've seen a fair amount of legislative activity in and around the Hope Scholarship and other student scholarship programs as well. But with that as the background, what you're seeing today is kind of the top of the pyramid that began with suggestions coming from the presidents. As I begin, I want to acknowledge Chairman Deaton's work and the Higher Education Commission's work on the outcomes-based funding formula, and so I put that as the top of the TBR's recommended legislative agenda for the upcoming session, and that is to support the Higher Education Commission's funding recommendations for the upcoming year. Just as a note, of the total $40 or $41 million in outcome-based funding, $28 million would accrue to the TBR institutions, An additional $9.5 million would be in funding the non-formula units, of which the TBR would receive $3.5 million. And while these next dollars don't come directly to the Board of Regents, I suggest that it be a part of something that we are able to advocate for, and that is increasing need-based aid for all qualified students across the state. That's an additional $28.6 million. And another item, $800,000 for a competitive grant program for institutional improvement fund. These are for institutes who are having trouble with continued outcome growth. Also, there would be attuned to that a tuition recommendation increase range of 0 to 3%. So on the operating funding side, that summarizes the higher education recommendation, and I would hope that that becomes a part of the TBR recommendation going forward. The next slide is also a part of the Higher Education Commission's recommendation. You saw me in front of you in September asking for approval of the TBR list, and this is the result of the action of the Commission. And the first item probably deserves a little bit of explanation. We have not seen this item before. This is the capital list recommendation, and on top of the list this year will be an item for $10 million for competitive grants for institutions to help them expand and grow, create new programs, expand and grow programs. Parts of the funding could go for equipment and could even go for minor facility type renovations. So as a part of the Commission's recommendation to the Governor this year, the number one item on the list is this new competitive grant program that might help institutions forward the Governor's Drive to 55 initiative. Preliminary thinking on this is that it might be a quarterly grant basis. The institutions would be able to apply. The applications may be vetted through the Governor's Workforce Subcouncil. This is similar in approach to what we saw last year with the LEAP grants, but this helps to build program capacity across across the state, and I think is a good recommendation. Our capital projects, as approved by this board, have also been approved by the Higher Education Commission, and just to remind you of those, it is Tennessee State University Health Sciences Facility, Tennessee Tech University Lab Science Building, East Tennessee State University Lamb Hall renovation, and the University of Memphis Biochemistry and Biology Facility. Also, the capital maintenance funding request, as approved by the Commission, $95.5 million for 87 Tennessee Board of Regents projects.
Could you guys take back the discussion from earlier on safety and security and think on if there is a potential addition to make here a conversation?
I think Regent Griscom may have an item on that.
Thank you.
You brought, can I sort of add to that?
Please.
Because I had a quick offside with
Okay.
Greg here. Since we anticipate there may be a little extra money coming up, I would hope, Chancellor, that you would agree that Vice Chancellor Gregory at least try to get his hands around the conversation we had earlier. What are some of the basic needs that our campuses would identify in starting down this path for safety? Because I think it sends a message, a large message across the state to parents, students, and others that we're serious about it, and that we try to begin that process, that if there's additional revenue, that maybe one of the ways to allocate some of those dollars are to begin doing things that make our campuses safer. Sure. And that is something that we can share as a Board of Regents. I bet you the University of Tennessee would probably come behind it as well. But listen to this conversation, and thank you again for having that today. But we may have this opportunity with one-time money, right, and we know it's going to be there to use this and sort of follow up on that conversation.
Yes, it's a great suggestion. We'll
Thank you. Yes. And maybe when we get around to the motion, let's just try to remember incorporating that as part of the motion. The next two items are actual pieces of legislation that we would like to ask your support on. The first has to do with immunizations, and while this is not necessarily a statutory difficulty for us, this has to do with the institution's responsibility to check immunization status of those individuals as they apply into our institutions. I would say this is a long time point of contention between higher education and the Tennessee Department of Health. It is incorporated presently in a rule by the Department of Health. They are doing their appropriate job in using higher education entry point as a choke point, if you would, for the population to check their immunization status. The difficulty for that for our institutions is that many people cannot find their immunization records. And because it is a point of entry, it becomes a barrier for many of our institutions. We simply see a lot of people show up and be told of that requirement and then walk away, and we don't see them again. And so we're asking for not a complete absolving of that responsibility, but for some accommodation, particularly the idea of being able to allow our students to assume that recent high school graduates in Tennessee have the appropriate immunizations, as well as those recently leaving the military and desiring to come to our institutions. I would say to you, we are doing some things internally as well for transfer students within our own systems to make sure our systems work properly so that we're not putting an extra burden on the institutions. So immunization simplification is one. The second is a piece of legislation that was introduced last year by Senator Gardenhire and Representative Mark White from Shelby County with respect to students who are here on DACA status. This bill has already passed the Senate, and it failed to pass the House by a single vote last year, so it is back sort of in the calendar committee still as an active bill. I'd like to just sort of describe to you who these students are. These are students who have the DACA status, which is the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. They are students who we think maybe around 7,000 here in the state. They have passed criminal background checks. They have lived in the United States for 5 years continuously. They arrived in the United States before the age of 16 and before 2007, and they are registered with the Department of Homeland Security. These are students who graduate from our Tennessee high schools and find themselves oftentimes with no place to go. These students would not, because they can't afford higher education at an out-of-state tuition rate. This proposal does not make them eligible for HOPE. It does not make them eligible for the Promise. But we think it is a positive measure that would help a number of our students who we believe are here to stay to have an opportunity to have further their education. So those are two particular pieces of legislation. This next one, Madam Chairman, I want to be clear about this. This is not yet a bill, but this is a position that I'm asking would this board allow us to take as we go forward. And Regent Prescott, I'm much in tune with what you said about the guns issue. I am really trying to listen to the gentlemen who are the experts. I'm not trying to engage either this board or anyone else in political kind of issues, because the gun issue is truly political. I'm trying to listen to who are our public safety officers and what are they telling us. And it's a pretty clear and consistent message that they believe that more guns on campus does not create a safer environment for our campuses. So what I'm asking is, would you allow us to continue to oppose the expansion of guns on campus? That's what that piece actually is. And then, Madam Chairman, finally, and this is sort of a little bit off script, I don't have a proposal for this, but this board earlier today heard our governor present on the Focus Act, his plan for higher education. And it is not yet in a bill form, so I don't have a bill to present to you. But let me summarize what I believe the essential parts of the Focus Act actually are. Number one, a sharpened focus by TBR on the state's 13 community colleges and 27 technical colleges. Number 2, the creation of local boards for Austin Peay State University, East Tennessee State University, Middle Tennessee State University, Tennessee State University, Tennessee Tech, and the University of Memphis. Thirdly, to enhance the role of the Higher Education Commission to provide greater coordination across the state to include capital project management, institutional mission approval, and higher education finance strategy. Those are the key elements. You heard the governor speak also about the establishment of an oversight committee and a transition committee to see this this transition through. So with that, Madam Chairman, those things constitute the recommendation of the staff for the legislative agenda, and I'm happy to entertain any questions you might have.
Yes, sir.
David, I think I've heard some reasons why we don't seem every year to renew our effort to have our student and our faculty board members serve 2 years, one non-voting and one voting, as the University of Tennessee does system. Is that just something that is off the table?
You know, I honestly would not take it off the table, Regent Thomas. I haven't. Actually, this is a little bit embarrassing on my part. I hadn't thought about that in a little bit. Let me say why we have taken it off the table in the past. We've taken it off the table because we sort of got ourselves in the midst of who would be the appointing authority. For those of you who are new to this argument, our board is constructed a little bit different than the University of Tennessee Board as well as the Higher Education Commission with respect to the position that Regent Russell holds, and that is that they're one-year appointments, but they are 2 members, I think I have this right, Russ, on the UT board as well as THEC. One is voting and one is sort of waiting to vote, so you kind of learn the year while you're waiting. So we've tried to make that legislative approval for the last couple of sessions, and the issue became an issue between, was the governor going to be the appointing authority or was the legislature going to be the appointing authority? And we didn't feel it was appropriate to get ourselves in the midst of that sort of debate. I'm happy if it pleases the board to renew that discussion if you think it's appropriate. And
Well, it sounds like, I mean, I certainly think it's appropriate because I think the student and faculty members and we as a board would benefit if we had the benefit of 2 years instead of 1, and they would benefit in what they take back to their campuses. But I think it's up to the staff as to whether, quote, it's appropriate. I certainly think it's appropriate. It's a question of whether it's doable or whether it's just dead on arrival, so to speak.
well, you know, if you would sort of give me the same privilege you've granted me before, and that is if we find ourselves in the midst of an executive versus legislative impasse, that we sort of pull back on it. I don't see a problem. Richard?
But with the governor's program, the focus program, then that, Bob, to your point, open up an opportunity. Yeah. If you're making these kind of changes, then now's the time to sort of add this in from our perspective that really would be helpful to us. So I would think that his proposal gives us a launching pad, David, to bring this in that we haven't had before.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right.
Good point, Regent.
I think you're right.
Thank you. That's all.
Thank you. So we've heard David's legislative agenda. We need a motion that would include then these 2. Regent Griscom, you're the wordsmith. Have at it.
Well, what I would suggest as some words to add that we no. So you caught me. I'm using you right.
Sorry,
No,
I should have given you a heads up.
No, what she's looking for is my thing about the safety part.
Yeah, you said it so eloquently before.
Well, see, since the governor wouldn't let me ask any more questions, I've sort of lost my train of thought. But
he knows you too well.
Yes, he does. Unfortunately, what I would say is that we ask staff to work with our institutions and identify opportunities where we can begin putting in place some safety measures on our campus, and that we find opportunities to identify those for the legislature and hopefully for the governor to support as well.
Perfect. And then, and with that, on the student and faculty regent piece, should the opportunity present itself to renew our request for an additional student and faculty regent appointed by the governor. Yeah, exactly, as part of the Focus Act.
Got it.
Thank you. Thank you, Regent Varlin. A second? Thank you, Regent Markham. David's good work requires a voice vote. All in favor? Opposed? Thank you very much. Well done. Thank you all. It was a good discussion. Good discussion. Dr. Denley, Dr. Nichols, and Dr. Perrier, we have some program proposal approvals. Now, these are all important, and I'm going to apologize in advance for rushing you. But I do want to get to the Chancellor on Roane State, and then we have some brief additions for this afternoon as well. So since we've had the information in our packages, hit the high points for us of what this board needs to know in granting its approval.
Of course.
Presumably. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have two new degrees to propose. The first is a new degree at ETSU, which is to establish a new Master of Science in Sports Science and Coast Education. ETSU really has made an academic priority of academic programs in sport, and it actually is the home of the Center of Excellence for Sports Science and Coach Education, and of course also the home of the Olympic Training Site. So this would actually be a new program which would be unique across the nation, and would really fill a real need nationwide in creating properly trained coaches. And it actually is scaling up an existing concentration that exists already on their campus into a new degree. So that's the new Masters in Sports Science. The second program is actually a joint program between Tennessee Tech and ETSU, and it's to establish a new bachelor's degree in science and engineering. This is a new thing for us, really, to establish joint degrees in this way. But I think it's something that we would very much look to see happen more in the future. And it really is an opportunity for us to take the expertise from one institution and share it with another. And so this new degree program absolutely fills an industry need in East Tennessee, where currently most of the bachelor's degree programs we have in engineering in the state are all concentrated in the West and in Middle Tennessee. So this takes this new engineering program exactly to East Tennessee and provides a degree which really would meet the needs of industry there in the east part of the state.
It sounds like a great collaboration.
It really is. It's a fabulous collaboration.
And ETSU is really carving out a niche in this sports medicine piece too, which is exciting.
Yes, it very much is. That's right.
Questions for Dr. Denley on these two proposals? If not, we need a voice vote. I need a motion to approve. Thank you, Regent Thomas. Second from Regent Duckett. Thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Opposed? Thank you very much. Warren, I think you have an announcement for us, a reminder.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, and I promise I'll try to keep this very, very brief. Under the designated authority that you have given to the Chancellor, we do have a opportunity to have programs, certificates, and degree programs that have been already established at our community colleges. If one college already has a program that you've approved, if another student replicates that exact same program, it only requires a 30-day review that you look at. And so what you constantly see is something from us every month about a 30-day review of programs. And that's what this is. The reason I'm bringing this before you, Madam Chair, is that not only for some of the newest board members that may not be aware of what that process is, but I really, frankly, wanted to make sure that that not only the board, but the people in the audience had an understanding of exactly what our community colleges are new programs and certificates that they are bringing forth that no one else has an opportunity to see. So that's really, this is an information item only. And I'll go through these very, very quickly. Columbia State Community College is establishing a new technical certificate in computer networking, which will be embedded with the newly aligned two-year degree in computer information technology. It's combining of an alignment of all of our computer information course programs across the state. The same with establishing a concentration in management within the existing AAS in business. Columbia State is also revising their existing two-year degree in information systems technology to align with the system statewide alignment. They are also, and to do this, they're establishing a new AAS in computer information technology with 3 concentrations in programming, cyber defense, and networking. And then also Columbia State has established a new is establishing a new technical certificate in web design and mobile technologies, which will be embedded in that AAS Computer Information Technology program. Again, these are happening because of the work that our community colleges have done to align the curriculums across the entire state. Pellissippi State is establishing a new concentration in design for web and print within their AAS and media technologies. And Southwest is establishing a new technical certificate in PC and networking technician, which would be embedded in the existing AAS and information technology. Volunteer State is requesting the establishment of a new concentration in cyber defense, as well as revising their post-AAS degree technical certificate in medical sonography. This 49 semester credit hour program adds a vascular certification that many employers in Middle Tennessee are now requiring before they hire. So those are the items that have been sent to you on the 30-day review. I remind you that this is just for 1 month. You receive these literally monthly, and so you always have a lot of reading, a lot of work to do in order to review these. But we do thank you and appreciate the opportunity for these to be done on a 30-day review so that our businesses and industries can become the recipients of the good work of our community colleges. So with that, Madam Chair, thank you for giving me the chance to present that.
Thank you, and we appreciate our community colleges willing to be nimble to respond to folks on the ground. So
we're sure trying.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Nichols. And in that same theme of remaining nimble to eliminate programs where they're not working and add others where we see a need, Carol Perrier, talk us through the TCATs, please.
Yes, ma'am. And of course, our primary mission is workforce development. It's been that for 50 years, and we hope it'll be that for 50 more. And the reason that we're able to do that is because the campuses do an awesome job of working with business and industry and staying up to date on what needs to happen. And with that, we've got some new program proposals for you that I'd like to share with you. We have 7 implementations that you have before you and have received. 2 notes on this. One, of the 7 proposals, 5 are actually at off-campus sites, so that allows us to serve more students and again, try to reach that drive to 55. The new implementations are we have 2 in advanced manufacturing, 2 in health sciences, 1 in IT, 1 in transportation, and 1 in human services. So that kind of sums up those. And then we move to the modifications. We have 5 of those. 2 of those modifications are actually taking a traditional type program and moving it into a hybrid type program, which is something we discussed at our institutional briefings about how that working that through may be able to help us again serve more students as we go through. We're reactivating the Shelbyville's truck driving program and the motorcycle ATV program at Jacksboro, both because of renewed interest. And the ATV program is actually getting a new name along with the graphics arts program at Morristown, hopefully to get a little more into what industry are saying, or sort of upgrading those titles just a little bit better to help people understand what we're doing. I do need to ask for one correction. In the material you received on the academic action, especially for Whiteville, we listed that Whiteville wanted to close their online program. That should have been their on-ground program, and it's the CIS program, I believe. Okay. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. You need a voice vote as well. Any questions for Dr. Perrier on these changes? Hearing none, a motion, please. Thank you, Regent Prescott. Second from Regent Griscom. If there's no further discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Thank you very much. Chancellor, I'm going to turn the floor over to you for the Roane State Community College naming request and some additional announcements after we act on this.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
President Chris Whaley has requested that a satellite of the Roane State Community College campus located in Scott County, Huntsville, Tennessee, be named the Scott County Higher Education Center W.H. Swain Campus. This campus name will honor Mr. W.H. Swain for his generosity to the college and to the community. Mr. Swain donated the 40 acres of land on which the campus is so beautifully situated, led the fundraising effort to equip the Howard H. Baker Jr. Library, which houses a significant collection of law books, has 2 study rooms and a large conference room. In addition, he raised the funds to build a man-made lake and multi-purpose athletic field on the center's grounds. Mr. Swain's desire to expand the Scott County Higher Education Center didn't stop there. He took on the task of raising over $500,000 to build and equip the 2,200 square foot multi-purpose science lab. Later, he recognized the need to expand the Student Center and challenged the community to raise $60,000 to match his $60,000 to finance the addition. In just 4 months, the funds were raised to build a 1,500 square foot expansion. Mr. Swain's passion and support didn't stop with just providing facilities for Roane State. All students from Scott County who enroll in dual credit classes or receive a scholarship thanks to his generosity. When he learned the Scott County Higher Education Center needed equipment to be able to bring the EMT courses to Scott County, he generously purchased everything needed for those classes. And prior to his death earlier this year, he established the W.H. Swain Endowment for Non-Traditional Students in Scott County. You may recall last year, Mr. Swain received the Regents Award for Excellence in Philanthropy on behalf of First National Bank of Oneida for his organization's generous contributions to Roane State Community College. The Roane State Community College Naming Committee met, unanimously voted to approve this naming request, and this naming is in compliance with our policy. So, Madam Chair, I'm very pleased to bring to you this request and recommend its approval to name the Scott County Higher Education Center W.H. Swain Campus.
Here, here. Motion to approve.
Move, so moved.
Oh, Regent Thomas, Regent Grissom. Yes. Will you give me a second first?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Please, go ahead.
Oh,
Well, yeah,
I was waiting for you.
Oh,
Oh, have you
let's
said
go ahead
yours?
and do the vote. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Regent
Thank you.
Grissom.
Thank you. Last Friday, Roane State Community College had its luncheon to talk about legislative issues. And while there, I went to that lunch, and there was a brief conversation about this naming. And so I want to thank Chris and his team personally. Dwight, being from Scott County, you know Bill Swain quite well, and the relationship he had with Senator Baker. And I appreciate it because Emily and I both got to know Mr. Swain extraordinarily well over our time working with Senator Baker. He was that quiet voice that was behind the scenes, that really gave Senator Baker the advice and counsel for some of us who sat there and were hired and tried to tell Senator Baker what to do. Bill was always there to keep us straight, and also was really a very, very important person in Senator Baker's life, both personally and professionally.
Yeah.
And having had the chance to see this institution in Scott County, having had the opportunity to get to know Bill Swain quite well, as we both did, I just wanted to say I can't think of a better person to name this for, because he really cared about Helenwood and Huntsville, Scott County, and all the people up there that he knew needed an opportunity to have, an education that would give them another shot at a great job. And so I just wanted the chance to sort of share a few words and say, for those of us who got to know Bill Swain, this is what he did, what he contributed, and this is an honor to somebody who really gave back a lot and was very, very important in the community that he called home. So thank you for letting me say that.
Beautifully put. Thank you. Dr. Whaley, would you like to add anything? We should all have a friend like Bill Swain, and the community should all have friends like Bill Swain.
Here, here. Madam Chair, thank you very much, Chancellor, members of the board. Regent Griscom, thank you very much to you and the Chancellor for those very appropriate comments. This is very emotional for us because for those of you who knew Mr. Swain, knew that when he came to Scott County from Detroit in 1942, he took some very hazardous, ill-formed roads to the University of Tennessee to complete his degree. Served later on the State Board of Education, and his passion came to being bringing higher education into Scott County, and that's not the only thing that he did. Scott Countyans know that he did many, many other important things, but his passion was always the empowerment rather that higher education could bring to the folks there. So from the building itself to then targeting, well, how do we get students here? And so we started with scholarships for traditional students, and then scholarships for dual enrollment students. And then, as the Chancellor said, this time last year at the age of 92, he formed an endowment for non-traditional students. So there would be no category of students who would fail to have the opportunity to come and take classes. And we miss him dearly. And we also miss that quiet voice, Regent Griscom, that persistent quiet voice who always said to us, anytime we would celebrate any achievement there in Scott County, his question was, well, this is great, but what's next? So thank you very much for honoring him. It's our pleasure to have his name on the campus there in Scott County, and our deep appreciation to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Whaley. We appreciate you. Thank you. Chancellor?
All right. At this point, we're almost through, but I did want to acknowledge some transitions. I think we notified you earlier this week or late last week that Tom Danford would be leaving the board, leaving our organization to pursue a new career or new opportunity beginning early next year. So his last day will be here, I think, on January 4th. Will be his last day, and he will immediately go to a new job. He was here earlier. I don't know whether he's still in the room or not, but we thank Tom for his service to the board and wish him the very best. We will be moving to help identify. We will get Greenwood Asher to help us identify an interim choice for someone to come in and lead that organization. As the governor's proposal kind of gets more fully developed, we'll have a better sense of what that position will be on a permanent basis. But for now, we do need your approval. I need your approval, subject to the consultation with the vice chair, to place an interim vice chancellor or chief information officer. Yeah, chief information officer.
So moved. Thank you, Regent Roddy. A second. Thank you, Regent Griscom. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Opposed? Thank you, and thank you to Tom for his service.
I also want to take just a moment and recognize John Cawthorn. John Cawthorn, stand up, John. John is
there he is.
Has spent 40-plus years with Tennessee Board of Regents institution, starting in Memphis in 1973, then moved to MTSU in 2003. And there are people that are so important to the system, not just to their institutions, but to the system. I mean, they really are the kind of the shoulders that the rest of us stand on. And John Cawthorn is definitely one of those people. What I did learn just the other night about John is that this is great. As a young man in Memphis, he was actually not only was he a great employee of our institutions, but he was also a wrestler. He was Little Johnny Thunder, and we couldn't find a picture of John, so we had to use a PowerPoint. This actually was done by folks on his campus. He's seen this once this week. I don't think he liked it then either. But that's the best we could do to try to capture what that must have been like for John. But John, thank you so much for your service.
Hear, hear.
then, as David mentioned earlier, inappropriately, because that was supposed to be me that got to do that, Dale is actually celebrating a birthday today. And the picture that I tried to get of Dale was a picture of him when he actually had hair. And as it turns out, that is so long ago that nobody could find a picture. It was way before digital photography was ever even dreamed of. We tried to get a picture of him, but the only pictures that we think showed him with hair, he also had a baseball cap on.
Oh.
So I didn't have that. But Dale, happy birthday. Happy
Happy
60th birthday.
Oh, it's a big one.
And then finally, in the category of bittersweet, actually bitter, David Gregory has just within the last few days announced that he intends to retire on January 31st. I think you know, I think it goes without saying how valuable he has been to this system over the years, and really to the state of Tennessee, not just to this system. So he will be missed.
That was a poignant moment, and as you
It
said,
was.
these are transitions indeed. David, there are no words, so you are amazing. However, whomever takes your place, we're going to ask them to be a little shorter at times. And that leaves Dale in sole contention for the, that's right, exactly, that's right.
That's right, for the rhino, that's right.
You will be missed, my goodness. Oh, my goodness. So we thank you all for being with us today. Once again, a thanks to Governor Haslam for his razor-like focus on higher education in Tennessee. Bill Swain actually wrote in an article in 1990, and this was in our notebook, and I thought it was so appropriate to today's discussion. The economic future of our citizenry depends on its education. And that's what Governor Haslam's Drive to 55, that's what the work of this board is all about. Dr. White said a little earlier that there is much intellectual capacity at Austin Peay State University, and indeed there is. But as we move through these next step with the governor's proposal, there is tremendous intellectual capacity across this system that will be brought to bear, and the transition working groups and all of the folks whose counsel we seek as this moves forward. And to you, John Morgan, for your steady hand and leadership guidance at the end of this 2015, we thank you for everything you do for our system. If no one has any further announcements, I will give us two quick reminders. Your newsletters are on the table of all the great things happening across the three elements of our system. Our surveys are on the table to fill out, please, and take a moment to fill those out before you leave. You have our calendar for next year, but the end of March is exciting as we will hopefully be on the new campus in Franklin, Tennessee of Columbia State Community College. So that's something to look forward to at the end of March. In the meantime, very safe travels wherever you head over this holiday season. We appreciate you all. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. We are adjourned.